Rain drummed on the tin roofs, casting an eerie rhythm to the night. The soldiers, huddled together in the muddy trenches, listened as the raindrops mixed with distant artillery fire. Amid the quiet whispers and hushed conversations, one soldier, a young black man named Elijah Freeman, slept fitfully. His dreams carried him to a different time, a different kind of battleground, the thick woods of the American South, where the moon hung heavily in the sky and the chilling howls of hounds echoed. Breathing heavily, a man, James Freeman, darted through the trees. His dark eyes, wide with fear and determination, scanned for any refuge. The relentless pursuit of hounds and men grew closer, their angry shouts and barks mingling with the night. Suddenly, a rapid river appeared, its dark waters promising both peril and potential salvation. James hesitated for a mere moment, then, drawing from well springs of courage, plunged into the waters. On the other bank, Mr. Hargrove, the plantation overseer, sneered. "You can't run forever," he yelled, taking a shot. The bullet splashed harmlessly into the river, but the message was clear. Freedom was a dangerous pursuit. As the dream's intensity grew, Elijah jolted awake, gasping for air. The trenches of the Great War were a stark contrast to the forests of his dream. Samuel, his friend and confidant, looked over. "Another dream about your ancestor?" Elijah nodded, swallowing hard. "Every time. It feels so real, Sammy. As if his struggle, his pain, it's imprinted in me." Samuel sighed, adjusting his rifle. "Your family's legacy is one of resistance, Eli. From plantation fields to these godforsaken trenches, you Freemans have always fought against the chains of the time." Elijah glanced at the gloomy sky. The rain now a gentle drizzle. "It's a heavy legacy, but one I'll carry. For James, for freedom, and for a world where war is but a distant memory." As the two friends settled into a reflective silence, the trenches came alive with the sounds of soldiers preparing for another day of battle. But for Elijah, the weight of his family's past and the brutality of the present intertwined, reminding him of the unyielding spirit of the Freeman lineage. The battlefield was a theater of horrors, a symphony of screams, shouts, and the relentless rhythm of artillery fire. Elijah Freeman moved with a unique determination, his every step echoing the legacy of his family name. While adjusting the strap of his heavy pack, a fellow soldier named Jenkins shouted over the deafening noise. "Hey, Freeman! You got any of that lucky charm left?" Jenkins was referring to an old coin Elijah often carried, once belonging to James Freeman, an emblem of freedom and resilience. Elijah grinned amidst the chaos, pulling out the tarnished coin. "Always," he replied, "hoping some of that Freeman luck rubs off on me." Jenkins laughed, though the levity was short-lived. A sudden explosion sent both men sprawling into the mud. The world became a nauseating blend of smoke, blood, and ear-piercing shrieks. When the dust settled, Jenkins lay motionless, a piece of shrapnel embedded in his chest, blood seeping into the muddied water below. Elijah, dazed but alive, dragged Jenkins to a safer spot. The brutality of the war was evident everywhere. Limbs scattered, faces contorted in pain, and the ground, a treacherous mix of mud and gore. The scenes were the visceral embodiment of hell. Later that evening, when the firing subsided, Elijah sat with a group of soldiers around a dimly lit lantern. The topic of family and ancestry came up. One soldier, Michael, with a distant look in his eyes, mentioned, "Heard you're one of the Freemans. The runaway hero's blood runs in your veins, huh?" Elijah looked into the flickering flame, the weight of his lineage heavy on his shoulders. James Freeman fought for his freedom against chains and whips. We're here, fighting against guns and gas. Different times, same fight. A younger soldier, Timothy, chimed in. "Must be something. Carrying such a name. A beacon of hope, but also a burden, I'd imagine." Elijah sighed. Being a free man means you're never truly free from the past. There's pride, but also a haunting. Every battle I fight, every decision I make, I wonder if I'm living up to that name. Timothy nodded. I've seen how some of the officers look at you, expecting more, expecting greatness. But remember, you're your own man, not just a shadow of your ancestor. Elijah smiled. Thanks, Tim. But shadows or not, I carry the name with me on this battlefield and beyond. It's my armor, my shield, against the horrors of this war. As the night deepened and conversations dwindled, Elijah lay back, staring at the starry sky. The legacy of James Freeman wasn't just a tale of the past. It was an ever-present force, guiding and shaping him amidst the gruesome reality of the present. Elijah sat at a corner table of Martha's Cafe, a quaint, dimly lit spot in Harlem, sipping his coffee and watching the world go by outside the window. The afternoon sun filtered through, casting patterns of golden light and shadow on the old wooden floor. The room was filled with the soft murmur of conversations. But one topic in particular seemed to dominate the room, whispers of a war brewing across the Atlantic. Henry, a boisterous man with a booming voice, held court at a larger table, his audience hanging on every word. War's coming. Gentlemen, he proclaimed, waving a newspaper in the air. It's the chance for us to prove ourselves, to show this country that we're as brave, as worthy as any white man. But at what cost, Henry? Retorted Grace, a young woman known for her fierce intelligence and outspoken nature. How many sons, husbands, and fathers will we lose? War isn't glory. It's blood and guts. It's children orphaned and wives widowed. Henry smirked. Look at Britain, France. They're building empires, and we're just sitting here. It's the age of conquest, Grace. She looked at him, her eyes blazing. And what are they conquering? Lands or souls? As their debate grew heated, Elijah found himself lost in thought. To him, this European conflict felt like a storm on a distant horizon, its rumbles barely audible. A tap on his shoulder brought him out of his reverie. Samuel sat down, a concerned look on his face. You've heard the talks. Elijah nodded, gesturing towards Henry and Grace. Hard not to. Samuel leaned in, lowering his voice. Rumors say they might start drafting soon. That means us too, Eli. Elijah looked into his cup, the remnants of his coffee forming an abstract pattern. Europe's wars have always been distant tales, Sammy. Why should this one be any different? Samuel sighed. Times are changing. This isn't just some royal feud. It's something bigger, and whether we like it or not, we might get dragged into it. Elijah looked up, determination in his eyes. Then let it come. My ancestors faced their battles. I'll face mine. But as he left the cafe later that day, the weight of the world seemed a little heavier on his shoulders. The whispers of war, which once seemed like inconsequential murmurs, now echoed ominously in his mind. Elijah entered his family's brownstone, the smell of simmering stew and baking bread filling the air. It was comforting, a stark contrast to the explosive world outside. His mother, a strong-willed woman with a heart of gold, sat stitching a torn shirt in the living room. She looked up, her deep-set eyes scanning Elijah. You've been talking to those boys about the war again, haven't you? Elijah hesitated. Ma, this could be a chance, an opportunity for us to be seen as equals. She set down her sewing, her fingers trembling slightly. Wars might change borders, son, but they rarely change minds. You might fight for a country, but will that country fight for you? Elijah's younger sister, Naomi, piped in from the doorway, her voice filled with youthful hope. But things are changing, Ma. With the war, they'll need every man, regardless of color. If Elijah fights, he could come back a hero. Their mother sighed deeply. And what if he doesn't come back at all? Later that evening, Elijah met with a group of friends in the local jazz club. The dim lighting and soulful music provided some relief from the tensions outside, but not for long. Marcus, a close friend of Elijah's since childhood, leaned in. "You seriously considering joining, Eli?" Elijah took a sip from his drink, the amber liquid burning his throat. "Maybe. If I go. If I fight, perhaps it'll mean something. Perhaps when I come back, they'll see me, not my skin." Marcus shook his head. "It's not worth it, man. This ain't our war. Why shed our blood for people who won't shed a tear for us?" Elijah replied, "Because maybe, just maybe, it's a chance to rewrite the narrative." Lena, Marcus's sister and a known activist in the community, joined the conversation. "Elijah, they've used us for centuries, treated us like tools, instruments. You think putting on a uniform will change that? You're just trading one set of chains for another." Elijah felt a whirlwind of emotions. "I don't have the answers, Lena. All I know is James Freeman ran for freedom. Maybe this is my run. My sprint towards a world where I'm not judged by the color of my skin." The night wore on, the saxophone's soulful cries echoing Elijah's internal turmoil. The allure of equality, of a seat at the table, clashed violently with the very real possibility of never returning home. Every conversation, every debate, left its mark on him, like cuts from an invisible blade. The quest for equality was never an easy one, and Elijah was learning that the hardest battles were often those fought within. The setting sun painted the Harlem skyline in hues of orange and red. Elijah, now back home, pulled out an old, dusty chest from beneath the family bed. The creaky hinges and the pungent aroma of aged wood and paper signaled memories long stored away. Inside, an old, leather-bound journal beckoned. The words of James Freeman. As Elijah began to read, he was instantly transported to another time and place. The pages told tales of midnight escapes, close encounters with bounty hunters, and the undeniable spirit of a man unyielding in his quest for freedom. Through ink blots and faded letters, James Freeman came alive. One entry, stained with what looked like dried blood, detailed a particularly harrowing night. May 5th, 1845. "Last night was one of close calls. Me, Anna, and young Jacob nearly met our end at the hands of the Wilkins gang. As we darted through the woods, the dogs snarling at our heels, Anna tripped. Without thinking, I doubled back, slashing at one of the hounds with my knife. Blood sprayed, hot and metallic. The beast yelped, but it gave us the seconds we needed. We ran till dawn. The path to liberty is soaked in blood." Reading further, Elijah stumbled upon another intense passage. July 15th, 1846. "Helped 5 more souls on their path northward today. Every step, every breath is a defiance of those chains. But freedom's price is steep. We were ambushed. Bullets and screams filled the air. Sarah took a bullet for me as she fell, pleading, urging me to carry on. The taste of iron and dirt filled my mouth as I dragged her away, leaving a trail of crimson on the ground. Hours flew by, and with every page, Elijah felt the weight of his family name pressing down on him. The house seemed to reverberate with the echoes of those who came before him. Finally, closing the journal, he looked up to find Naomi watching him, her eyes reflecting the pain and pride intertwined in their lineage. "Do you see now?" she whispered. "Our bloodline is one of fighters, Elijah. From the chains of bondage to the trenches of war, we've always faced our challenges head on." Elijah nodded, a new fire burning in his eyes. James Freeman faced adversaries of flesh and blood. My enemies might be different, but the fight is the same. I carry his name, and with it, his legacy. Naomi gently touched his hand, and like him, you won't be alone. The legacy of James Freeman wasn't just in the tales of daring escapes and blood-soaked encounters. It was in the resilience and spirit he passed down through the generations. And as the storm clouds of war gathered on the horizon, Elijah was more determined than ever to uphold that legacy. The recruitment office was buzzing with activity. Men from all walks of life, drawn together by a common purpose, the impending war. Elijah hesitated at the entrance, taking in the myriad of faces, each mirroring his own mix of determination, uncertainty, and fear. As he stepped forward, registering his name, the recruiter gave him a once-over, noting the family name. Freeman. Eh? Any relation to James Freeman? Elijah straightened up, a hint of pride evident in his voice. The recruiter whistled, impressed. That's quite the lineage. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Physical training, paperwork, and endless drills. Each night, as he lay on his cot, the weight of his decision pressed upon him. Memories of his family, the tales of James, and the looming prospect of war clashed in a turbulent storm. One evening, as Elijah polished his newly issued boots, Marcus paid him a visit. The air was thick with tension as Marcus confronted his childhood friend. "You really going through with this, Eli? Marching off to face down the very machine guns and tanks we've only heard stories about?" Elijah paused, considering his words carefully. "Every generation of our family has faced its demons, Marcus. For James, it was chains and dogs. For me, it's the trenches and the gas. It's my fight." Marcus clenched his jaw, his voice choked with emotion. "And what if you don't come back? What if this fight takes everything from you?" Elijah met his gaze squarely. "Then it's a price I'm willing to pay. For respect, for equality, for a world where the next generation might not have to." A few days later, the train station was filled with the sounds of sorrowful goodbyes and promises to write. As the steam from the engine billowed around them, Elijah's mother held him tight, tears streaming down her face. "You carry our name, our legacy. But remember, it's not the battles you fight that define you, but the way you fight them." The train's whistle blew, signaling the start of his journey. As the landscape sped by, Elijah pondered the parallels between his great-grandfather's perilous escape and his own journey into the unknown. The contexts might be different, but the essence was eerily similar. In the distance, dark clouds gathered, mirroring the tempest in his heart. The path to freedom, whether from chains or prejudice, was never easy, and the unknown always demanded its pound of flesh. But for a Freeman, stepping up to the challenge was in the blood. Elijah stood in a vast open field, the air thick with the smell of freshly turned earth and sweat. Before him, lines of men were being drilled, the rhythmic pounding of boots echoing ominously. To one side, a demonstration was taking place on the use of the latest machine gun, its rapid staccato bursts turning wooden targets into splinters in moments. Not far off, a massive tank rumbled into view, its tracks churning the mud beneath. Amid this symphony of war, Elijah's mind wandered. He thought of James Freeman, evading trackers and navigating through dense woods, using the North Star as a guide. His great-grandfather had faced hounds, hunger, and the relentless pursuit of those who saw him as property. In contrast, Elijah was learning to navigate a labyrinth of trenches, dodge bullets, and face the looming specter of chemical warfare. His training officer, Lieutenant Hale, strode over, breaking his reverie. "Impressive, isn't it, Freeman? The might of modern warfare." Elijah nodded, his eyes transfixed on the monstrous tank. "It's powerful, sir. But it also feels..." Hale grinned. "Progress always feels that way. These machines, they're the future. Just as the cotton gin was in your great-grandfather's time." Elijah frowned, recalling the stories. The cotton gin, a symbol of technological progress, had intensified the demand for slave labor, making James Freeman's journey to freedom even more treacherous. "That cotton gin chained my kin," "Sir," Elijah replied, voice edged with bitterness. Hale looked taken aback. "I didn't mean." "It's all right, Lieutenant," Elijah interrupted. "It's just, every age has its shackles. I wonder if these machines, these marvels of technology, will be ours." As night fell, Elijah sat alone, staring at the stars, those same celestial bodies that once guided James to freedom. He imagined the scars on James' back, the product of lashes and brutality. Then he looked down at his own hands, tainted by the grease and grime of war machines, symbols of a new kind of brutality. The violence of his era was no longer intimate, no longer face. Taste. It was industrial, impersonal, delivered from a distance. A distant scream broke the stillness, a comrade experiencing a nightmare, perhaps a premonition of the violence to come. Elijah clutched his rifle closer, pondering the nature of progress. The chains of the past were evident, tangible. But the chains of progress, they were more insidious, hidden beneath layers of steel and smoke. Was this his inheritance? The continuous cycle of struggling against new manifestations of old demons? Whatever the answer, one thing was clear. The battle for freedom and dignity was far from over. The first blast of artillery was something Elijah would never forget. It shook the ground, rattling the bones in his chest and reducing the surroundings to a nightmarish blur of smoke, mud, and metal. His ears rang, and for a moment, he felt as if the very earth was attempting to swallow him whole. "Goddamn hellfire!" shouted Private Mills, a lanky man from Louisiana, as he scrambled to load his rifle. "This ain't nothing like they told us back home." As the smoke cleared, the real horror unveiled itself. The battlefield, once a tranquil meadow, was now littered with body parts and the twisted remains of barbed wire. Men screamed, their bodies flayed open by shrapnel, calling out for mothers, wives, or anyone to ease their pain. A hand clutched Elijah's ankle. It was Private Robinson, eyes wide with terror, a dark pool of blood expanding around him. "Eli, my guts. Help me." Elijah, paralyzed by the gore, looked down to see Robinson's intestines spilling out. He tried to speak, to comfort, but no words came out. Suddenly, amidst the tangible horrors, something more insidious caught Elijah's attention. Shadows darker than the smoky haze flitted on the periphery of his vision. Whispers, too soft to distinguish, yet laden with malice, prickled at the edges of his consciousness. "Elijah!" yelled Sergeant Thompson, snapping him out of his trance. "Move! Damn it! This ain't the time for daydreaming." But as they advanced, pushing forward against the enemy lines, those shadows seemed to move with them, always at the edge, always watching. Was it the smoke, the trauma, or something far more sinister? That evening, as night fell and an uneasy silence settled, the soldiers tried to catch some respite. Elijah, however, found himself plagued with nightmares. In the twisted landscape of his dreams, the battlefield merged with the cotton fields of the past. The same shadows that stalked him during the day were there, circling the figure of James Freeman as he ran, their whispers growing louder, more distinct, bound by blood, forever chained. Awakening in a cold sweat, Elijah felt a weight like never before. The war was not just a battle against a foreign enemy, but against shadows, memories, and legacies that threatened to engulf him. The stories of James Freeman's courage and resilience were not just tales of the past, but a call to arms in the present. Elijah gripped his locket, a family heirloom passed down through generations, and whispered a silent prayer. The emerging shadows of this new battlefield were formidable, but so was the spirit of a freeman. A cacophonous rumble disturbed the morning mist. The soldiers, including Elijah, jolted from their morning routines to witness the strange monstrosity rolling across the training ground. "What in God's name is that?" whispered Private Mills, his voice barely audible over the mechanical growls. "That, Mills, is our ticket to victory," declared Sergeant Thompson with a smirk, pointing at the hulking metal beast before them. "Meet the tank." Elijah's eyes widened in awe. He had heard rumors, whispers of new war machines, but seeing it in person was another matter. The tank seemed invulnerable, an ironclad beast that defied the bullets and bombs that had claimed so many lives. As the tank demonstrated its might, another sound joined the fray, a rhythmic rattle that echoed with deadly precision. Rows of soldiers operated newfangled machine guns, their rapid fire tearing through makeshift enemy lines, leaving naught but destruction in their wake. Private Jenkins, a young recruit, remarked with glee, "With these by our side, we'll be home by Christmas." But it wasn't just the sounds of war that signaled this new dawn. A peculiar sight caught Elijah's attention. Men donning strange masks, their faces obscured, eyes shielded behind glass. It was a drill for chemical attacks, another sinister invention of this modern conflict. Sergeant Thompson handed out these gas masks, his voice grave. "Gents, these are your lifelines. If you see a yellow-green cloud or smell something sweet and pungent, mask up immediately. This ain't no ordinary smoke. It's mustard gas. And believe me, you don't want to know what it does to bare skin and lungs." Private Robinson, the ever-curious soul, asked how bad could it be. Thompson looked him straight in the eye, his voice a dark whisper. "It blisters your skin, burns your eyes, and drowns you from the inside. I've seen men choke, foam at their mouths, their eyes turn blood. Red. It's a slow, agonizing death." A chill ran down Elijah's spine. For all the promise of these new technologies, there was a darkness, a malevolence that came with it. These weren't just tools. They were harbingers of unprecedented carnage. That evening, as Elijah polished his boots, he couldn't shake off an unsettling thought. Was this the price of progress? To make killing more efficient, more impersonal? As he gazed at the distant tanks and heard the distant chatter of machine guns, he pondered how this war, with its mix of old valor and new horrors, would reshape the world, and at what cost. Elijah's fingers brushed the cold metal of the machine gun, the rhythmic heartbeat of the war, as the sun cast long, dancing shadows across the training grounds. He felt a sense of purpose and pride he had never known. Around him, fellow soldiers operated the deadly machinery with a combination of trepidation and awe. "I'll wager my month's pay that your great James Freeman never saw anything like this," remarked Private Harper with a mix of jest and admiration. Elijah let out a small chuckle. "No, Harper. But he had his own dragons to slay, his own mountains to conquer. I reckon the chains and overseers were as daunting as these machines are to us." During a training drill, Elijah was singled out for his uncanny ability to operate the machine gun with remarkable precision. Sergeant Thompson, usually a hard man to impress, nodded in approval. "Good work, Freeman. Your ancestors would be proud." Yet, not everyone looked upon Elijah's prowess with appreciation. Private Daniel sneered, "Just because you can fire that thing doesn't mean you're one of us. Don't forget where you come from." Elijah shot back, the weight of his lineage pushing down on his words. "Trust me, Daniels, I never do. But this isn't about where I'm from. It's about where we're going." After an exhausting day of drills, as night settled in, Elijah lay on his bunk, staring at the stars and daydreaming. He dreamt of a world transformed by the might and marvel of machines. A world where men were judged not by the color of their skin, but by their abilities. A world where the Freeman name would not be a heavy burden of the past, but a symbol of hope and perseverance. Whispers filled the barracks, stories of valor and tales of futuristic cities, where horse-drawn carriages would become obsolete, replaced by steam and iron. As these stories flowed, Elijah pictured himself in that world, respected, recognized. His lineage not a mark of infamy, but a testament to resilience. And in those precious moments before sleep, as the din of training and the scars of the past momentarily faded, Elijah clung to the hope that this brutal war, with its blend of old prejudices and new opportunities, would pave the way for a brighter tomorrow. The campfire's glow illuminated a circle of eager faces. Soldiers leaned in, absorbing the warmth and the conversation. The topic of the night, the undeniable and breathtaking power of the new technologies. "You know, my grandfather fought in the Civil War," began Sergeant Thompson, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. He spoke of bayonets, of charging headlong into the enemy. "Can't imagine doing that now. Not with these godforsaken machines around." Private Harper, always quick with a quip, laughed. "Bayonets. Might as well throw sticks and stones compared to this. We have tanks that can crush a man as if he's but a bug, machine guns that mow down entire regiments. It's a whole new world." Elijah, ever the introspective one, voiced his concerns. "But with such power, do we not risk losing our humanity? Is there honor in a death delivered from a mile away, unseen, unfelt?" Lieutenant Davis, a man respected for his tactical mind, weighed in. "War has never been about honor, Freeman. It's about winning. These machines, they ensure we have the upper hand. Honor is a luxury of the victors." As the evening wore on, Elijah found himself engaged in a heated discussion with Corporal Mitchell, a man who had never seen eye to eye with him. "These weapons, Freeman, they are the great equalizer," Mitchell said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Perhaps with them, Ian you lot can prove your worth." Before Elijah could retort, an alarm sounded, an enemy raid. Soldiers scrambled, and amidst the chaos, the raw power of technology was unleashed. Machine guns roared, tearing through flesh and bone, painting the night with gore. The eerie glow of flares showcased bodies sprawled grotesquely, their insides spilling out, a testament to the machine's ruthless efficiency. Elijah found himself manning a machine gun, the cold, methodical rattle in stark contrast to the visceral brutality it inflicted. Men screamed, writhed, their very essence being extinguished under the hail of bullets. The odor of burned flesh, mixed with the metallic tang of blood, hung heavy in the air. As dawn broke, revealing the carnage, the men were eerily silent, the price of their victory evident. Yet amidst the visceral devastation, a glint of hope sparkled in some eyes. They had defended their position, ensured their survival. The machines had kept their promise of progress. Elijah, washing the blood off his hands, reflected on the night's horrors. He felt torn, pride in the victory, horror at the means, and hope, however faint, for a future where such devastation might pave the way for lasting peace. Elijah stood on the edge of the encampment, staring out at the scorched horizon. The landscape bore testament to the power of machinery. Trees uprooted, trenches etched deep into the earth, and the sporadic remnants of tanks shattered into grotesque metal skeletons. Beside him, Corporal Leonard, another black soldier, lit up a cigarette. "You ever think, Elijah, that these weapons, these marvels of tech, could finally put us on the same footing as them?" he said, exhaling a stream of smoke. Elijah nodded thoughtfully. There's power in these machines, the kind of power that doesn't care about the color of the hand that wields it. Just imagine. Leonard's eyes sparkled, returning home, not as black soldiers, but as heroes, men who mastered the mightiest weapons the world has ever seen. The folks back home, they'd have to see us in a new light. A cluster of soldiers had gathered nearby, sharing tales of their individual heroics. Among them, Private Robinson, another black soldier, was demonstrating how he had operated a machine gun during the last skirmish. "This beast," he patted the gun affectionately, "levels the playing field in more ways than one." Elijah approached and joined in, recounting his own experiences. His tales of valor and skill with the new warfare tech drew a captive audience, including some white soldiers who, before the war, might have dismissed him outright. Later, around a makeshift campfire, Elijah and a group of black soldiers reminisced about their families and ancestors. Samuel, a young man with a sharp wit, remarked, "Our forefathers, they fought their own wars, not with tanks and guns, but with resilience and hope." Elijah, feeling the weight of his lineage, replied, "My ancestor James Freeman. He became a legend in his own right. Without any of this," he gestured to the weapons surrounding them. He challenged the world and its biases. "Now, we're armed with technology, and I can't help but feel that this is our moment, our chance to reshape history." The conversation took a dark turn when Private Thompson chimed in. But at what cost? Look around you. The ghastly aftermath of the recent battle was evident. Bodies lay mangled, limbs torn asunder, faces contorted in eternal agony. Is this the price of progress? Of equality? Elijah gazed at the devastation, his heart heavy. "Every generation has its battles, its costs," he whispered. "We can only hope that our sacrifices lead to a brighter, more equal tomorrow." The morning sun painted a deceptive serenity over the landscape. Birds sang their melodies, seemingly unaware of the looming carnage. Elijah, standing with his battalion, took in a deep breath, feeling the weight of the equipment strapped to his body. A whistle pierced the air, the signal they had been waiting for. "Move forward!" shouted Captain Harris. The first wave of tanks rolled out, their engines roaring and churning up the earth beneath them. Soldiers, Elijah among them, moved in formation behind these mechanical beasts, hoping their presence would shield them from the worst. But the enemy was prepared. Suddenly, the sky darkened with incoming artillery shells. Explosions blossomed all around, sending shockwaves that knocked many off their feet. "Stay close to the tanks," Elijah yelled to a young soldier beside him. But his words were swallowed by the eruption of a shell nearby. The boy was gone, replaced by a crater. Ahead, machine guns chattered their deadly rhythm. Leonard, who had been talking about the promises of post-war equality just a day before, was caught in the line of fire. He crumpled, his dreams of a brighter future extinguished in a hail of bullets. Gas. The warning went out as greenish. Yellow clouds rolled towards them. Soldiers scrambled to don their gas masks, but some weren't fast enough. Elijah watched in horror as comrades clawed at their throats, gasping for breath, their skin blistering and eyes melting. Chaos reigned. In the midst of the pandemonium, Elijah took cover behind a destroyed tank. The mighty machines, once symbols of their hope for dominance, now lay scattered and broken, just like the men who believed in their invincibility. Pulling off his mask for a moment, Elijah choked on the acrid air, tasting metal and ash, looking at his reflection in a muddy puddle. He barely recognized the man staring back. Blood smeared his face, and his eyes, once full of hope and pride, now reflected horror and disbelief. As the battle ebbed, a haunting silence descended. The ground, churned and reeking of chemicals, was littered with the bodies of friends and foes alike. Men who had dreamt of heroics and equality lay as broken and discarded as the machines they'd placed their faith in. Sergeant Mitchell, a burly white soldier who'd been standoffish at the start but had warmed to Elijah over time, limped over, his uniform stained with blood. "They said this was the future," he murmured, gazing out at the destruction. "But this is hell." Elijah, his voice trembling, replied, "We believed in the promise of progress, of technology. But at what cost? Look at what we've become." The two soldiers, bound by the shared trauma of the battlefield, sat amidst the wreckage, pondering the devastating duality of their modern age. Elijah's boots squelched with every step, sinking into the mud mixed with the viscera of both man and machine. He'd thought he'd been prepared, but nothing could have primed him for this. The once green field was now a hellish landscape, scarred and churned by shellfire, littered with lifeless bodies in varying states of disarray. Tattered remnants of uniforms clung to charred corpses. The once threatening tanks lay defeated, spewing thick black smoke into the sunset sky. But what haunted him most were the faces of the fallen, some twisted in perpetual screams, others frozen in shock, their eyes clouded by the horrors they'd witnessed. In the distance, sporadic cries for help pierced the thickening fog, only to be swallowed by the ghostly echoes of gas clouds. A hand reached out, trembling, fingers weakly grasping. "Water, please." Elijah bent down, his heart aching, as he offered his canteen to the dying soldier, a white man he did not recognize. As the man drank greedily, their eyes met. In that brief moment, the color of their skin mattered not, only the shared experience of sheer terror. The soldier coughed, blood bubbling up from his lips. "Thank you." With that, he shuddered and went still. Elijah forced himself to move on, a desperate need to find his surviving comrades, driving him forward. Everywhere he looked, the world seemed to have lost its color. The once vibrant hues of the land were replaced with the monochromatic tones of destruction: gray, brown, and a sickly shade of green from the lingering poison gas. As night enveloped the battlefield, a cold wind began to howl, carrying with it the putrid stench of decay. Elijah felt an overwhelming weight pressing down on him. Each breath became labored, and his vision blurred, the horrors of the day replaying in his mind's eye. He stumbled, collapsing next to the remains of a tank. The metallic taste of blood filled his mouth, a cut on his lip reopening. The world began to spin, and a deep chill settled in his bones. The whispers of the dying and the agonized screams merged into a cacophony of torment. Shadows played tricks on his eyes, taking the shape of dark, foreboding figures. His fingers dug into the cold, wet earth as his body was racked with tremors. Darkness crept in from the edges of his vision. And then, with a feverish intensity, the dreams began. Shapes morphed and contorted, blending the past's chains with the present's mechanized monsters. And from the depths of this nightmare emerged a vast, interconnected hive of machinery, pulsing and growing, called Legion. The collective, dark side of technology. Elijah's tormented sleep continued, the line between reality and nightmare blurring, heralding the struggles yet to come. Elijah's vision was clouded by a heavy fog that appeared out of nowhere. He could hear the distant rumble of machines, a rhythmic hum that seemed to echo his heartbeat. The ground beneath him trembled, each vibration sending shockwaves through his very being. "Is this real?" he muttered, his voice seeming to get lost amid the noise. Before him stood a massive wall of machinery, an intricate maze of cogs, gears, and bulbs that flickered with an eerie glow. The very air seemed to pulse with energy, electric charges sending sparks flying every which way. He reached out, the cold metal biting into his palm. An involuntary shiver ran down his spine as he felt the machinery's heartbeat, rhythmic, cold, devoid of emotion. As he ventured deeper, the maze grew more complex. The sound of clanking metal filled the air, drowning out all other noises. He could see figures trapped within, their eyes vacant, their bodies ensnared by wires and chains. They seemed to be part of the machinery, feeding it, yet being consumed by it. Suddenly, a soldier materialized before him, his face a grotesque mask of pain and terror. His uniform was torn and charred, remnants of a gas mask hanging loosely around his neck. "Help me!" he screamed, reaching out. Elijah tried to move, to offer some assistance, but he felt rooted to the spot. The machinery seemed to grow more aggressive, its movements more violent. The soldier's screams intensified as he was pulled into the maze, the metal tendrils wrapping around him, drawing him in. A deafening roar filled the air, and Elijah watched in horror as the soldier was torn apart, his body reduced to mere cogs in the vast machinery. Blood sprayed, mingling with the oil and grease, creating a gruesome spectacle. Desperate voices began to reach out to him from every corner. "Save us. Don't let it consume you too. Run." Each plea was more harrowing than the last, adding to his growing sense of panic. Trying to escape, he ran, his footsteps echoing loudly. The machinery seemed to grow, its presence suffocating, its intentions clear: to assimilate, to dehumanize, to destroy. He stumbled upon a clearing where the ground was stained with a mixture of blood and oil. The remnants of countless soldiers lay scattered, their uniforms melded with the machinery, their faces frozen in a perpetual scream. "This is the cost of progress," a voice whispered in his ear, cold and mocking. The relentless march of technology, grinding humanity beneath its heel. Elijah's breath came in ragged gasps as he tried to make sense of the dream. Was this a manifestation of his recent experiences in the war, or a forewarning of a grim future? With a start, he woke up, his heart racing, the chilling images of the dream still fresh in his mind. But even as he tried to shake off the remnants of the nightmare, he couldn't help but wonder, was this the true face of progress? The air grew colder as Elijah delved deeper into the intricate maze of machinery. The rhythmical hum and pulsating lights became more intense, each step he took echoing ominously around him. The weight of the oppressive machinery pressed down on him, and every so often, he thought he caught a glimpse of shadowy figures moving just beyond his vision. But more unsettling than sights were the whispers. "Closer. Come closer." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It was as if the very walls of the maze were speaking to him, each whisper a caress, seductive yet chilling. With every step, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, pulling him deeper into the labyrinth. A fog began to rise, swirling around his feet. Through the mist, a silhouette began to form. It was as though the machinery itself was bleeding, converging, reshaping, and from this mechanical metamorphosis, an entity began to emerge. At first, it seemed like a tangle of wires and gears, but as it took shape, it became more organic, more sinister. "Who are you?" Elijah demanded, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. The entity chuckled, a sound like grinding gears. "I am the embodiment of progress's shadow. I am the voice of all the souls consumed by the insatiable appetite of technology. I am." Elijah watched in horror as Legion's form shifted again. Glimpses of faces, soldiers he recognized, friends he had lost, innocent victims of this terrible war, all melded into Legion's form. They seemed to scream in agony, their features distorted, eyes pleading for release. Every so often, a piece of machinery would protrude grotesquely from Legion's form, a grim reminder of the symbiotic relationship between man and machine. "Why have you brought me here?" Elijah's voice was barely a whisper, the weight of the revelations pushing down on him. Legion moved closer, the ground quaking with each step. "You are at a crossroads, Elijah. The same machinery that you hope will bring equality and progress has a cost. Every advancement, every leap forward, is built on the backs of those who suffer, those who are consumed. And I am the manifestation of that cost." Legion's form surged forward, ensnaring Elijah. The coldness of the metal, the heat of the organic mass, the agony of the trapped souls, all of it enveloped him. As he struggled, he felt the very essence of the entity seep into him. Images flashing before his eyes. Battles, screams, gas clouds, the relentless march of machinery. The lost hopes of countless souls. "Remember this," Legion whispered. its voice a cacophony of anguish and rage. Progress has a price, and sometimes that price is too great to bear. With a gasp, Elijah tore himself free, the shadows of the maze receding. But the weight of his encounter with Legion remained, a stark reminder of the duality of progress and its consequences. Elijah's eyes blinked open to the gray haze of dawn, the stench of burned flesh, the distant cries of the wounded, and the eerie silence of the dead surrounded him. He sat up, his head pounding, heart racing. The memories of the nightmarish dream rushed back in torrents. Pushing his trembling hands through his hair, he whispered to himself, "It was just a dream. Just the dream. Just the damn fever." But the intensity of the visions, the visceral reality of Legion, made the words ring hollow. As he began to stand, his gaze fell upon a gas mask half buried in the mud. Its empty eye sockets seemed to stare back, an uncanny reminder of the machinery in his dream. Shivering, he picked it up, the cold rubber feeling almost organic in his grip. "Freeman," called out a voice. Turning, Elijah saw Sergeant Mathis approaching. "Good to see you on your feet. We need all hands to prep for the next offensive. We've got new tech to deploy." As the sergeant led him to the new equipment, Elijah was introduced to a massive machine gun, its bullets larger and more deadly than he'd ever seen. With its black metal and gleaming muzzle, it looked like a direct offspring of the mechanical maze he'd navigated in his dream. "This beauty," the sergeant beamed, patting the gun, "is going to change the game." Elijah forced a nod, but the very touch of the cold metal made his skin crawl. Every rattle, every metallic clink, was a haunting echo of Legion's voice. Later, as he was handed a freshly designed grenade, its weight felt all too familiar. The very innovations that were meant to empower and protect them seemed to whisper promises of destruction. Every technological marvel was tainted with the visions of sacrifice and pain. That evening, as he lay in the trench, the soft hum of an approaching tank served as a lullaby. But instead of sleep, Elijah found himself caught in a liminal space where the dream world and reality intertwined. The distant roar of engines, the hiss of gas, the chilling metallic whispers, all seemed to be calling out to him, reminding him of the ever-present Legion. Shaking, sweaty, and desperately trying to anchor himself to reality, Elijah whispered to the night, "I won't be swayed. I won't let the past dictate the future." But the shadows seemed to laugh in response, hinting that the battle for Elijah's soul and sanity was just beginning. Legion's form expanded and shifted, a monstrous chameleon made of gears and shadows. With a swift movement, it ensnared Elijah, tendrils of machinery curling around him, drawing him close. Suddenly, Elijah's surroundings shifted. He was no longer in the maze but standing amidst the booming noise of a cotton mill during the Industrial Revolution. Men, women, and even children slaved away, their faces drawn and pale, fingers raw and bleeding. A young boy, no older than 10, reached out to him, eyes devoid of hope, his hand crushed and mangled by the unforgiving machine he operated. "The birth of industry," Legion whispered, the voice echoing in Elijah's ear. Progress demanded its price in sweat, blood, and tears. Before Elijah could react, the scene changed. He now stood on a construction site of a great railway bridge. Workers dangled perilously from ropes, and the screams of a man who had fallen to his death filled the air. Steel beams dropped, crushing limbs. Each pound of the hammer was a cry of pain, every rivet a sacrifice. The railways that connected nations, that brought progress to every doorstep, Legion's voice held a mocking tone. But see the lives they claimed. The visions grew more rapid. Coal mines with deadly explosions, factories with infernos consuming hundreds, streets filled with child laborers. And then the sounds of war, explosions, cries of despair, men trapped under tanks, the gasping breaths of soldiers in gas masks, and the mournful silence of desolated battlegrounds. Each scene held its own horror, but the vision that shattered Elijah's heart was yet to come. A familiar scene of a plantation emerged. Slaves working under the brutal sun, lashes marking their backs. He saw a figure that bore a striking resemblance to him, presumably an ancestor. The man was chained to a post, being whipped mercilessly, his screams echoing. The cruelty, the inhumanity. It was all too much. Even before these machines, progress has always demanded a price. Legion's voice was almost a caress, chilling in its tenderness. Your own blood knows it too well. The question is, how much more are you willing to pay? Elijah was on his knees now, tears streaming down, the weight of generations of suffering pressing down on him. The visages of his ancestors, their pain, their resilience, their sacrifices, all stared back at him. Then the softest whisper, almost drowned out by the screams and cries of the past, reached him. What will be your legacy? Elijah, how will you balance the scales? As abruptly as it started, the onslaught of visions ceased. Elijah found himself back in the maze, still in the malevolent grip of Legion, but now armed with a deeper understanding of the true cost of progress. The sky was choked with smoke, turning the early morning into a hazy twilight. The battlefield symphony was dominated by the staccato bursts of machine, gunfire. Every shot sent out ripples of sound that seemed to meld into a never-ending, soul-crushing cacophony. As Elijah settled behind one of the new mounted machine guns, the cold metal felt strangely intimate, like a lover's embrace. He glanced over at Corporal Jacobs, who was already absorbed in the task, his eyes narrowed in concentration, hands steady. The gun's mechanism seemed to extend from Jacobs' very being, turning man and machine into one. The other side of the trench was hidden by the smoky curtain, but Elijah didn't need to see. He aimed where the shadows moved the most, where the darkness seemed densest, and then he fired. The gun roared to life, jerking under his touch as it spewed deadly metal. Figures on the other side crumpled and fell, mere silhouettes in the murk. Their silhouettes in the murk. They had no faces, no names, just shapes being erased from existence. "You're getting the hang of it, Freeman," yelled Jacobs over the deafening noise. His own gun spat fire in short, controlled bursts, making every shot count. The thrill of power surged through Elijah. With every squeeze of the trigger, he felt invincible, cutting down the shadowy forms with clinical precision. But beneath that exhilaration, a cold realization began to seep in. These weren't just shadows. They were men with dreams, hopes, families. During a brief lull, as they awaited more ammunition, a young soldier, barely out of his teens, approached the machine guns, his face a mix of awe and terror. It's like reaping wheat," he stammered, his voice shaking. Elijah, still coming down from the adrenaline high, turned to him. "It's the future of warfare," he said, trying to sound confident. "Steel and smoke. No more swords or hand. To hand battles. Just pull the trigger." "But it's so." "That's the point," Jacobs interjected, his voice hard. "We can't afford sentiment. Not if we want to survive this hell." Elijah nodded, but as he repositioned himself behind the machine gun, a chilling thought lingered. In the quest for efficiency and power, had they traded away their very humanity? The dawn broke with an unusual serenity. The familiar sounds of artillery and gunfire were conspicuously absent, but this silence, rather than comforting, felt ominous. The air was dense with anticipation, every soldier's breath visible in the crisp morning air. Across the field, a mysterious mist appeared. It wasn't like the morning fog they were used to. This was thicker, with an unnatural hue. Before anyone could comprehend what it was, the wind began to carry it their way. "Gas! Gas! Gas!" The warning cry echoed down the trenches. Men scrambled, fumbling for their gas masks. Those eerie, bug-eyed contraptions that transformed familiar faces into alien visages. Elijah hastily pulled his mask over his face, the rubbery smell enveloping him. Panic ensued for those who couldn't get their masks on in time. The mist was now upon them. And then the first coughs rang out. Innocuous at first, but they soon morphed into something far more sinister. The men began to choke, their lungs betraying them, filling with fluid. A soldier near Elijah, a young lad named Thomas, stumbled, his mask hanging uselessly around his neck. His eyes widened in horror as the gas reached him, skin turning a ghastly shade. He clawed at his throat, froth bubbling from his lips, his eyes bloodshot. The trenches reverberated with the haunting sounds of the agonized gasps of the dying. "Oh, God. Oh, God, no," murmured Jacobs. Watching his comrades collapse around him, their bodies convulsing in tortured spasms. The true cruelty of this weapon was its indiscriminate nature. An ill wind blew some of the gas back to where it had originated, causing screams to rise from both sides of the battlefield. In this hellish moment, friend and foe were united in their suffering. Elijah felt the first sting of the gas, even through his mask. It seeped in through tiny cracks, making his eyes water and his throat burn. Panic surged within him. He could feel it, the invisible claws of the gas trying to pry the life out of him. Every breath became a laborious task. Collapsing against the trench wall, he could hear the distant voice of Jacobs. "Stay with me, Elijah. Breathe. Damn it, breathe. Damn it, breathe." But the voice seemed to fade, drowned out by the overwhelming sensation of being trapped underwater, unable to reach the surface. In this world, where machines and technology were supposed to herald progress, the true cost of advancement was laid bare. It was a chilling reminder of humanity's capacity to forge tools, not just of progress, but of untold suffering. And in that trench, amidst the silent cries of the damned, Elijah confronted the darkest aspects of the modern age. The war's cacophony had become a constant backdrop. But amidst the chaos, a distinct sound emerged, the whirring and clanking of machinery. Soldiers, once defined by their physical prowess and martial skill, were now defined by the machinery they operated. The day after the gas attack, as the sun lazily climbed the horizon, Elijah found himself in the company's makeshift workshop. Rows of soldiers were busy, not tending to their wounds, but to their machines, cleaning gun barrels, calibrating sights, oiling gears. There was an intimate dance between man and machine, a sense of mutual dependence. Roberts, a lanky soldier from Elijah's regiment, was one such man. He sat cradling his machine gun, delicately cleaning each part. "She's a beauty, ain't she?" he remarked, looking up to see Elijah watching him. Elijah nodded. "Seems you care for it more than yourself." Roberts chuckled. "She keeps me alive. I owe her that much." He caressed the gun's barrel with a cloth, his touch almost tender. "You should treat yours the same. These machines, they're all we got out here." Walking further into the workshop, Elijah noticed Carter, once a jovial man, now seated silently, working on a tank's interior, his face smeared with grease. Gone was the camaraderie, the playful banter they once shared. The man-machine bond had become so profound that the lines were blurring. It was later that night, as Elijah sat polishing his rifle, that he felt it too, the seductive pull of the machine. The cold, unyielding steel began to feel more familiar, more comforting than the touch of another human. The weight of the weapon, its precision, its unwavering purpose. It was the only certainty in a world spiraling into chaos. "Elijah," a voice broke his trance. It was Jacobs, eyeing him with concern. You've been at it for hours. Take a break, man." Elijah looked up, the gleaming barrel reflecting in his eyes. "It's all that stands between us and them," he murmured. "We've become extensions of them. Or they've become extensions of us. I can't tell anymore." Jacob sat beside him, a grim expression on his face. "We've become the very thing we wield. Cold, ruthless, mechanized." Elijah's fingers tightened around the rifle. "Do you think there's a way back, Jacobs? A way back to who we were before all this?" Jacob sighed heavily, looking out into the darkness of the trenches. "I don't know, Elijah, but we must hold on to what's left of our humanity. That's the one thing these machines can't replace." As the night deepened, the two men sat side by side, surrounded by the cold embrace of steel, each lost in his own thoughts about the cost of this mechanical age and the fragment of humanity they clung to amidst the mechanized carnage. The war had transformed the landscape into a metallic graveyard. Among the scattered bodies and discarded weapons, Elijah began to notice something sinister, echoes of his haunting dream. Every twist of a cog, every hum of motor seemed to whisper Legion's name. As he trekked across the terrain, a heavy tank trudged by, its massive treads leaving deep impressions in the mud. For a split second, he saw it, not as a machine of war, but as a living, breathing entity. The tank's metal exterior appeared to pulse, its exhaust fumes forming a near lifelike breath in the cold air. Legion's voice, cold and metallic, echoed in the distance. "Progress is relentless, just like me." Disturbed, Elijah shook his head, attributing the visions to fatigue. But the visions persisted. As he approached a machine gun post, the rhythmic firing seemed to synchronize with his heartbeat. The soldier operating it appeared entranced, his eyes vacant, hands moving with machine-like precision. "Do you see it too?" Elijah whispered to Jacobs, nodding towards the soldier. Jacobs frowned. "See what?" "The way he's become one with the gun. It's as if—" Jacobs glanced at the soldier and then back at Elijah, his face etched with concern. "It's the war, Elijah. It does things to a man." But as days turned into nights, the presence of Legion grew stronger. Soldiers, once lively and spirited, now moved with mechanical precision, their conversations reduced to mere exchanges of information. Even in the mess hall, the clinking of utensils seemed to form a grotesque symphony, each note whispering Legion's dark promise. One evening, as Elijah worked on a malfunctioning artillery piece, he felt an overpowering sensation. The metal seemed to merge with his skin, the cold steel seeping into his very being. A voice, unmistakably Legion's, murmured, "You're becoming a part of something greater. Embrace it." Elijah recoiled, dropping his tools, eyes darting around the dimly lit tent. The machinery shadows seemed to twist and writhe, converging into a familiar, oppressive shape. Panicking, Elijah stumbled out of the tent, gasping for air. He collided with Jacobs, who grabbed his shoulders, trying to steady him. "It's everywhere, Jacobs," Elijah rasped, his eyes wild with fear. "Legion. It's in the machines. In us. It's taking over." Jacobs looked deep into Elijah's eyes, sensing the genuine terror. "We have to fight it, Elijah. Remember who we are, where we come from. We can't let it consume us." As the two men clung to each other amidst the cold, mechanical embrace of the war, a chilling realization dawned on Elijah. This wasn't just a war against adversaries. It was a war for their very souls. The question remained, could humanity ever reclaim its essence from the mechanical monsters it had birthed? Elijah lay on the cold, wet ground, the deafening sounds of artillery echoing in the distance. His body ached, the horrors of the day weighing heavily on his mind. Closing his eyes, he wished for respite, but sleep had become an elusive friend. As slumber overtook him, A chilling sensation crawled up his spine, and the familiar hum of machinery permeated the air. Once again, he found himself in the vast, inky void of interconnected gears and pulsating lights. The sights and sounds were almost nostalgic now, a testament to how much the dream realm had become a part of him. He wandered through the maze, the metallic aroma thick in the air. As he moved forward, he felt a palpable sense of anticipation. Legion's influence seemed omnipresent, the ambience fraught with tension. Suddenly, Elijah's foot caught on something. Looking down, he recoiled in horror as he recognized the mangled body of a fallen comrade, his face contorted in an eternal scream of agony. Before he could react, the body was consumed by the cogs below, ground into nothingness, becoming one with the machinery. The ground below him began to shift, and the scenery around him transformed. The trenches of no man's land sprawled out before him, but this was no ordinary battlefield. The twisted, grotesque parodies of his memories from the war took form. Tanks fused with human bodies trundled across the landscape, their treads made of hands and faces, each one crying out in anguish. The sky rained not bullets, but shards of glass, piercing soldiers who morphed into grotesque shapes as they fell, their screams echoing in the wind. "Beautiful, isn't it?" A deep, resonating voice echoed around him. Legion materialized, more colossal and menacing than ever. "Your memories, your fears, they feed this place. Your war is our creation." Elijah, fighting the surging terror, retorted, "You're a figment, a creation of my mind." Legion chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down Elijah's spine. "Am I? Or is this the reality you refuse to accept? Every life taken, every drop of blood spilled, it strengthens me." Images of massacred comrades flashed before Elijah's eyes, gasping for breath amidst noxious gases, obliterated by artillery, torn apart by machine gun fire, all magnified and twisted into the machinery around him. As the dream's intensity increased, a profound sense of hopelessness gripped Elijah. But amid the cacophony, a familiar voice whispered, soft but determined, "Remember who you are, Elijah." With a jolt, Elijah awoke, drenched in sweat, the early morning light filtering through the gaps in the tent. The memories of the dream and the battlefield blurred. But one thing was clear. The war inside him was as real and deadly as the one outside. The evening sky was painted a deep shade of crimson, the last light of day, yielding to the encroaching darkness. Elijah, weary from the day's skirmishes, found a moment of solitude. But as he stared into the horizon, the world around him began to shift, a now familiar sensation of being transported. Suddenly, he stood atop a massive overlook, surveying a sprawling industrial city below. The scale of production was staggering. Gargantuan factories pumped black smoke into the sky, their interiors glowing with the red-orange hue of molten metal. Conveyor belts snaked in and out of the buildings, transporting raw materials at a frantic pace. Men and women worked in unison, seemingly a part of the machine themselves, their motions robotic and precise. Amid the cacophony, Elijah's attention was drawn to one particular building. It was grander, more opulent than the others. As he approached its entrance, massive double doors swung open, revealing an armory of technological wonders. Advanced artillery, rifles with intricate scopes, and armored vehicles. Sleeker and more menacing than any tank he'd ever seen. A shiver went down Elijah's spine as he heard that familiar, haunting voice. "Impressive, isn't it?" Legion whispered, its voice dripping with honeyed malice. The spectral figure materialized beside Elijah, its form shimmering as if made of liquid metal. "These marvels, they're the future," Legion continued, gesturing grandly at the array of weaponry. "Can you imagine the power they would bestow upon you? With these at your command, victory is but a step away." Elijah, entranced by the display, could feel the allure of the promise. The weight of the war, the losses suffered, everything could be avenged. The playing field could be leveled. But what's the cost? Elijah finally managed to utter, his voice shaky. Legion leaned in, its presence oppressive. Embrace it, become one with it, and the world will be yours to command. Visions flashed before Elijah's eyes. Himself at the helm of vast armies, his enemies fleeing before him. Every battle a swift victory. The glory, the recognition, it was all within reach. Yet, amid the euphoria, Elijah caught glimpses of the aftermath. Towns razed to the ground. Civilians caught in the crossfire. Every wind left a trail of devastation. The dichotomy of the promise was clear. Unparalleled power, but at a cost that was almost too horrifying to comprehend. The scene began to fade, the sounds of machinery replaced by distant artillery fire. As reality reasserted itself, Elijah found himself back in the trenches, the weight of temptation bearing down on him. He knew that the war he faced was not just against an external enemy, but also the battle within, resisting the siren call of unchecked power. The factory's monotonous hum dimmed, replaced by the rhythmic beat of hooves on packed earth. Dust kicked up around Elijah as he found himself on a different battlefield. Across the field, soldiers charged, soldiers charged. Swords raised, muskets firing. No tanks, no gas masks. Just men. In the midst of the battle stood a figure Elijah recognized all too well. James Freeman, his great-grandfather. Elijah had grown up hearing tales of James' heroics, the strength and honor with which he'd led his men. Now, here he was, seeing James in action. There was a rawness, a sheer human will to the fight. No machinery to hide behind. Every strike, every gunshot was a personal testament. Yet the sounds of this battle were soon drowned out by that chilling, whispering voice. "Do you see, Elijah?" Legion murmured, its voice echoing around the scene. "This is the price your forefathers paid. The blood spilled, the lives taken, all for progress." Elijah's heart pounded as he watched James take down enemies, defending his comrades. The violence was brutal, the close, quarter combat leaving no room for detachment. Yet there was a strange purity to it, a directness that the mechanized warfare of Elijah's time lacked. Legion continued its insidious taunt. Your great-grandfather's sacrifices, his struggles, they were but stepping stones leading to now. The chains of progress are relentless, binding every generation tighter. As Legion spoke, the ground beneath Elijah began to shift. The earth morphed into cold, hard steel, chains of iron and gears erupting from the ground, snaking around his limbs. Panic set in as he felt himself being drawn downward, ensnared by the weight of technology's march. Every era has its battles, its costs, Legion whispered menacingly, as the chains tightened. But you, Elijah, you're destined for more. Can't you feel the weight of your legacy? The chains that bind you to the past and the future. Amidst the tightening grip of the chains, a singular vision flashed. James Freeman, looking directly at Elijah, his eyes filled with both determination and warning. The weight of generations, the sacrifices made, and the haunting path ahead all culminated in that one gaze. Then, as abruptly as it began, the scene shattered, and Elijah was thrust back to the haunting reality of trenches and machines. The vision of James Freeman lingering, a stark reminder of the intertwining past, present, and the horrifying future that loomed. The smoke-filled trenches seemed to vanish. Elijah found himself on an expansive, desolate plain. The sky was painted an angry shade of crimson, and the ground was cold, metallic, and unyielding beneath his feet. There was a stillness, punctuated only by the rhythmic heartbeat that echoed around him. From the horizon, a tall, looming figure approached, the form of Legion, ever-changing, sometimes appearing as an intricate assembly of machinery, other times as a monstrous organic shape, but always exuding an oppressive and overpowering energy. Elijah, the entity's voice echoed, both soothing and menacing. Do you see the potential? The raw, boundless power that progress offers? As Legion spoke, visions formed around them. Battles won effortlessly, enemies cowering in fear. The tide of war shifted decisively. Machines and men operating in flawless sync, decimating anything in their path. The allure of such dominance was palpable. You can have this, all of it. Legion's voice grew seductive, wrapping around Elijah like a velvet shroud. With my help, you will be unstoppable, reshaping the very fabric of this war. Think of the lives you could save, the victories you could claim. But as the visions grew more grandiose, there was an undercurrent of darkness. Bodies strewn across the battlefield, the very earth soaked in blood. The cries of the dying echoing hauntingly. Every image of victory was paired with a grotesque tableau of destruction. What do you want from me? Elijah whispered, the weight of the offer pressing on him. Only a small thing, Legion murmured, its tone dripping with false sweetness. Embrace me. Accept the power and the progress I represent. Let me in, and the world will be yours to command. Images flashed before Elijah's eyes. Himself, standing atop a mountain of lifeless bodies, machinery fused to his skin, eyes devoid of any humanity. The very essence of what made him humanity, the very essence of what made him human seemed to be draining away, replaced by cold, unyielding steel. But what's the cost? Elijah managed to choke out, tears streaming down his face. Legion leaned in, the whispering voice now a guttural growl. Your soul, your very essence, the humanity that connects you to past generations, to James Freeman. Surrender it to me. The battlefield, the machines, the promise of power. It was intoxicating. But the vision of James Freeman, the memory of chains made of steel and gears, reminded Elijah of the price of such progress. Legion's form grew larger, more intimidating. Choose, Elijah. Power and dominion, or continue in your pathetic struggle, holding on to outdated ideals. Elijah felt himself teetering on the edge, the temptation pulling him towards the abyss. But deep within, the legacy of his ancestors and the weight of their sacrifices gave him strength. No, he whispered defiantly, I won't be your puppet. Legion roared in frustration, the ground trembling, but Elijah stood firm. As the entity's rage intensified, the desolate plain began to crumble around them, and Elijah felt himself being pulled back to the realm of the living, the haunting offer of the devil's bargain still echoing in his ears. Elijah's eyes snapped open, the first rays of dawn filtering through the mud-caked tent. The heaviness in his chest was palpable, as though a great weight was pressing down upon him. The remnants of the dream, or rather the nightmare, clung to him like a shroud. He pushed himself upright, every joint aching as if he had been carrying the weight of the world. The lines between dream and reality seemed to blur. Was it truly a dream, or a premonition of a choice he'd soon have to make? As he stepped out of the tent, the world seemed different. The metallic beasts and war machines that littered the camp whispered promises of power. The rhythmic churning of engines and the mechanical hum were no longer just sounds. They were seductive calls echoing Legion's tempting offer. Hey, you all right? Corporal Reynolds, a close friend, noticed Elijah's distress. Elijah hesitated, the memories of the dream and his confrontation with Legion flooding back. Just a bad dream, Reynolds. Nothing to worry about. Reynolds frowned, concern evident in his gaze. You've been distant lately. More so than the others. This war, these machines, they're changing all of us. Elijah nodded, looking around. Every piece of machinery seemed alive, watching him, waiting for a decision. The monstrous tanks, the rapid-fire machine guns, the gas masks hanging ominously, all whispered of power, of dominion. As the day wore on, the temptations grew stronger. Every time he operated a machine or gave an order, he felt the seductive pull of Legion. Would it really be so bad to have that power? To turn the tide of the war? To end the suffering? That evening, as darkness enveloped the camp, Elijah found himself alone, contemplating the twisted metal and machines around him. The cold, hard steel seemed to beckon, its touch both chilling and enticing. The power to change the course of this war, to save countless lives. The whispering voice of Legion echoed in his mind, all at your fingertips. Tears streamed down Elijah's face as he battled the internal tempest. The memories of his ancestors, the struggles of James Freeman, the weight of their sacrifices, all pushed him towards resistance. But the allure of the power, the promise of ending the war, tugged at his very soul. As he gripped the cold steel of a nearby machine gun, its surface seemed to pulse with life. The boundary between man and machine, between humanity and raw power, seemed to diminish. The chapter closed with Elijah, silhouetted against the dim campfires, his face a mask of anguish and resolve, teetering on the brink. The choice before him was clear: to embrace the might offered by Legion and reshape the world, or to hold on to his humanity, even if it meant facing insurmountable odds. The morning dawned cold and misty, with an uneasy silence that stretched across the camp. The humdrum activities commenced, with soldiers cleaning their rifles, running drills, and checking their equipment. But even in these routine tasks, a pervasive feeling of unease was palpable. Elijah, still reeling from the weight of his recent dreams, glanced at his watch, realizing that it had stopped at precisely 3:17 am. He tapped it, hoping to stir it to life, but it remained still. A minor inconvenience, he thought. But then he looked around. Several of his comrades were shaking their wrists, tapping their watches, each bearing the same time. 3:17 am. Damn thing's busted, grumbled Corporal Reynolds, eyeing his watch with annoyance. What are the odds they'd all break at once? As the day progressed, more peculiarities emerged. Radios, usually a lifeline for coordinating movements and receiving orders, emitted nothing but static. One soldier, attempting to adjust the frequency, caught a fleeting, whispered voice that seemed to mutter, "They come," before fading back into white noise. But it was during the afternoon offensive that the anomalies took a devastating turn. Elijah's platoon, advancing on an enemy position, relied heavily on their electronic gear to coordinate. Just as they approached the enemy lines, every piece of their equipment went haywire. Gun sights malfunctioned, causing shots to go astray, injuring allies in the crossfire. Communications gear buzzed with deafening static, rendering the platoon disoriented and leaderless. A grenade, aimed for a distant enemy trench, exploded prematurely, wreaking havoc among Elijah's comrades. The ground seemed to throb with a strange energy, intensifying the chaos. Soldiers cried out in agony as shrapnel tore through their ranks. The stench of burning flesh filled the air, mingling with the sharp tang of spilled blood. Retreat. Elijah's voice broke through the cacophony, and what remained of the platoon staggered back, nursing their wounds and dragging their injured. That evening, in the dim candlelight of the trenches, whispered conversations echoed the length of the dugout. Tales of curses, ancient battlefields haunted by vengeful spirits, and other supernatural forces were exchanged with hushed fervor. "We've disturbed something ancient," murmured a soldier, his face pallid from a fresh gash on his arm. Reynolds leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "Have you heard the legends of this land? They say it's cursed, that every few centuries the ground thirsts for blood." Elijah, his mind grappling with the day's events and the persistent echo of Legion in his thoughts, felt a shiver run down his spine. whether it was a curse, the touch of the supernatural, or something else entirely. One thing was clear. The war had entered an even darker chapter. The evening settled with an eeriness that Elijah couldn't quite shake. The sky was a brooding shade of gray, the clouds heavy and foreboding, threatening rain. But the true oddity was the wind, which surged through the camp with unexpected force, sweeping up dust and rattling tents. Sitting by a campfire, trying to warm his hands, Elijah overheard the soldiers in hushed conversations. "Did you hear that?" Corporal Reynolds asked, looking around. "That wasn't just the wind. I swear I heard someone whispering." Another soldier, PVT, Martinez, shook his head dismissively. "It's just the wind playing tricks on you. We've been through hell. It's messing with our heads." But Elijah wasn't so sure. Closing his eyes, he tried to focus on the breeze, and almost immediately, the faintest of murmurs reached his ears, whispers that seemed to drift in and out, formless yet eerily familiar. Embrace. Surrender. It was Legion's voice. There was no mistaking it. The chilling realization caused goosebumps to erupt on his skin. The boundaries of his dreams and reality seemed to be thinning, and he feared what that might mean. The fire crackled, drawing his attention back to the present. He heard snippets of conversations from various soldiers, each more unsettling than the last. "Heard my name, clear as day, PV," Mitchell was saying, his face pale. "I thought I was going mad," said another, rubbing his temples as if trying to ease a headache. And then, the words that truly sent a shiver down Elijah's spine came from a soldier seated across the campfire, his face shadowed by his helmet. "It was just like in my dream," he murmured, almost to himself. Elijah leaned forward. "What did you say?" The soldier looked up, eyes wide and haunted. I've been having these dreams. A voice offering me power, tempting me. And now I'm hearing it even when I'm awake." Elijah swallowed hard, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. Legion was no longer confined to the depths of his dreams. It was here, among them, whispering its seductive promises to any who would listen. As the wind howled louder, the whispers grew more pronounced. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and the camp, once a haven, now felt like a trap with an unseen predator lurking, waiting to pounce. Moonlight streamed through the gaps in the trees, painting the camp in a pale silver hue. The fatigue of battle, both physical and mental, weighed heavily on the soldiers, evident in their stooped shoulders and hollowed eyes. A haunting silence permeated the night, broken only by the crackling of campfires and hushed voices that spoke of nightmares too terrifying to utter in daylight. Elijah, while refilling his canteen, overheard snippets of conversations from nearby soldiers, machines everywhere, endless, whispers, promises of power, but at what cost? The similarities to his own dreams sent a cold shiver down his spine. His close comrade, Lieutenant Daniels, approached him. The light from the nearby fire revealed the man's sunken eyes, shadowed with sleeplessness. "Elijah," he began, his voice shaky, "I've been having these dreams, visions, mechanical monstrosities stretching into infinity. Voices, one in particular, seducing, tempting. It's maddening." Elijah's heart raced. Daniels looked up sharply. "You know of it." Elijah nodded, recounting his own experiences. The vividness, the seduction of power, and the unshakable feeling of being ensnared by a darkness too vast to comprehend. "They're not just dreams, are they?" Daniels murmured, his voice barely audible, choked with fear. "It's as if someone is trying to break through, to infect our minds." As the night deepened, Elijah and Daniels gathered a small group of soldiers, each sharing their nightmares. The narratives, while unique in detail, all bore the signature of Legion's insidious touch. Visions of sprawling machinery, the dehumanizing march of progress, and the seductive whispers promising dominion over foes. "It's as if we're all connected, PBT," Thompson voiced, his eyes darting nervously, all ensnared in this shared nightmare, like legions trying to forge us into some collective, for some dark purpose. A sense of dread settled over the group. The realization that they weren't isolated in their torment, that Legion's grasp extended far beyond the confines of a single mind, was horrifying. Elijah clenched his fist, determination simmering beneath his growing fear. "We must fight this," he declared. "Whatever Legion is, whatever it wants, we can't let it win. Our humanity, our very souls, are at stake." The soldiers nodded in agreement. A pact silently formed. But as the fire's embers slowly died out, and the chilling embrace of the night deepened, the true scale of their challenge began to dawn. Legion's influence was pervasive, and the battleground was not just the war, torn fields, but also the very sanctity of their minds. The chilling wind swept the camp as Elijah gathered the soldiers under the skeletal remains of a dilapidated barn. The walls bore the scars of past artillery strikes, but it provided some semblance of shelter. One by one, they arrived, their faces lined with a mix of fear, curiosity, and determination. Elijah recognized Daniels, Thompson, and a few others. Yet some faces were unfamiliar, drawn from other platoons and units, but bound by the same haunting affliction. Daniels started, his voice trembling but resolute. "I've seen the sprawling machinery, heard the voice, felt its pull." He unveiled his forearm, revealing a burn shaped uncannily like a gear. The group gasped in shock as more soldiers hesitantly revealed identical marks. "It did this to me in my dream, but it's here in reality," Daniels choked out. Thompson stepped forward, pulling back his sleeve to reveal a similar mark. "I saw my comrades, transformed into machines. Their screams of pain and terror still echo in my ears. The machines grafted onto them, tearing flesh, replacing bone." One after the other, tales of gore and horror poured forth. Soldiers forcibly melded with machines, the ground itself rising to consume entire units, only to spit them out as grotesque hybrids of man and machine. Amidst these shared tales of torment, something unexpected emerged, a growing bond, forged in the crucible of shared nightmares and fear. They weren't just soldiers now. They were brothers, tied by the spectral chains of Legion's malevolence. "We can't let it continue. This, Legion, it seeks to divide and conquer, PBT," Martinez said, her voice fiery with defiance. "You're right," Elijah affirmed. "We've been chosen not as victims, but as warriors. We must fight back." "But how do we battle an enemy we can't see, can't touch?" a soldier named Grayson asked, desperation clear in his voice. "By sticking together," Daniels declared. "Legion seeks to fracture us, to sow doubt and fear. But as one, united in purpose and spirit, we can resist its influence." Determined nods followed Daniel's proclamation. Their shared experience, instead of isolating them, had created an unbreakable bond. The meeting concluded with a pact, a silent vow to be each other's keeper. To watch, to guard, to shield from Legion's insidious whispers. Each soldier, placing their hand over their heart, swore to combat Legion's influence and protect their newfound family. As they dispersed, the weight of their task loomed large, but they carried a renewed hope. In unity, they'd found strength, and in strength, they'd find victory. Legion had awakened forces it couldn't fathom. The human spirit's unyielding resolve and the indestructible bonds of brotherhood. Elijah's fingers trembled as he penned another entry. the once pristine pages of his diary now stained with mud and splattered with dried blood. His handwriting, which was once elegant and controlled, appeared rushed and jagged, revealing his deteriorating state of mind. July 14th, 1922. The stench of decay refuses to leave my nostrils. Every time I close my eyes, I see Thompson's face twisted in agony, the metal ripping through his flesh as the bullet found its mark. And then there's Martinez, her voice forever silenced by the yellow cloud that crept into our trench. The diary was interrupted with a long smudge, as if a tear had blurred the ink. He continued after a pause. I used to wake up, feeling the sun's warmth, harboring hope that maybe, just maybe, this day would bring peace or a sign of victory. But now, every day feels like a prelude to a looming darkness. A distant rumble interrupted his thoughts. Artillery. Elijah gripped the edges of the diary, taking a deep breath. He listened as the screams and orders to brace echoed through the trench. 2VT. Grayson crawled into the bunker, his face pale and eyes wide with terror. They're gearing up for another push. Eli. God. It never ends. Elijah looked up, his eyes heavy and sunken. I know, Gray. Just another day in this godforsaken place. Grayson noticed the open diary and hesitated, still keeping that. Elijah gave a rueful smile. This diary, it's a testament, a record of our pain, our sacrifice. If we don't make it out, someone needs to know what happened here, the true horror of it all. Grayson shivered, looking around. You ever think that maybe Legion's watching? That it's feeding off our despair? Elijah stared into the distance, his voice barely above a whisper. Every day, Gray, every single day. As night fell, the two soldiers clung to their post, the sound of machine gun fire providing a grim lullaby. Elijah's diary sat beside him, a silent witness to the unimaginable horrors of war and the price paid by those who endured it. Elijah sat huddled, his back against the dirt wall, feeling the moisture seep into his uniform. The trenches never dried. They were an unending quagmire of mud and despair. The pungent aroma of rotting flesh and decomposing wood was omnipresent, an olfactory assault that constantly reminded him of the cycle of death surrounding him. He heard a soft squelch, and Peavy. Davis slid down beside him. They'd been friends since basic training, their bond solidified through the fires of war. Davis grinned, producing a soggy cigarette. Care for a smoke? Just keep it away from me, Elijah grumbled, though his lips twitched in amusement. Those things will be the death of you. A mocking chuckle from Davis was cut short by a sudden explosion. The world shook and dirt and debris rained upon them. An ominous whistle pierced the air, and before Elijah could shout a warning, a shell landed meters from their position. The deafening blast threw Elijah aside, blanketing him in mud and shrapnel. Groaning, he tried to sit up but was met with sharp pain. His ears rang and his vision blurred, but he managed to make out Davis's silhouette. Davis lay sprawled in the mud, a large gash running across his abdomen, his intestines spilling out. Blood mixed with the muck, creating a grotesque pool around him. Elijah's heart sank as he crawled, dragging his injured leg toward his fallen comrade. Dave. Davis coughed, blood spattering his lips. His eyes met Elijah's, filled with pain and fear. Guess those cigarettes won't be the death of me after all, huh? Elijah's vision blurred with tears. Don't talk like that. You're going to be okay. But his voice lacked conviction. They both knew the truth. Davis' fingers weakly grasped Elijah's wrist. It's okay, Eli. Just make it count. All this, make it mean something. Elijah's voice broke. I promise. Davis' grip slackened, his eyes glazing over as he drew one final, shuddering breath. The world around Elijah seemed to slow. He looked at his hands, covered in Davis blood, and the weight of war pressed down on him like never before. His friend's lifeless body beside him, the sounds of continuing gunfire in distance, and the incessant cries of pain and death created a cacophony of despair. "Why are we even here?" Elijah whispered, his voice filled with anguish. "What are we even fighting for anymore?" The value of their sacrifices, the worth of every life lost, haunted his thoughts, making him question the very essence of the conflict around him. Elijah staggered, using his rifle as a makeshift crutch. Each step was a testament to his will, pushing through the numbing pain of his injured leg and the haunting memories of Davis. The trenches, once buzzing with the sounds of soldiers and sporadic gunfire, now bore an unsettling quiet. The sun was setting, casting a bloody hue over the horizon. And as the light faded, a chill settled, one that had little to do with the descending darkness. His weary eyes scanned the dimly lit trench, finding his comrades in various states of rest. All seemed to be lost in their own worlds, some with faraway looks, others trembling in sleep's embrace, no doubt reliving the day's horrors. Suddenly, Elijah froze. From the edges of his consciousness, an unmistakable murmur arose. Faint at first, but growing steadily in volume, it danced around him. He strained to decipher the words, but they seemed just beyond comprehension. He wasn't alone in this. PVT. Miller, a young recruit with a face too youthful for this hellscape, shot upright, his eyes wide with terror. "You hear it too, don't you?" he whispered frantically. Elijah nodded slowly. It's everywhere." The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that seemed to be speaking in unison, repeating the same haunting mantra. The air grew colder still, every breath visibly hanging in the frosty air. As Elijah tried to focus on the voices, he discerned one that stood out, unmistakably familiar. Legion. Embrace. Embrace the future. The voice was no longer just a whisper, but a forceful command echoing all around. Sergeant Thompson, a grizzled veteran with scars mapping his face, suddenly sprang to his feet, hands clapped over his ears. "Make it stop!" he screamed, eyes wild with fear. "I don't want to listen! I won't!" Elijah, terror gripping him, found himself speaking, though the words were not his own. It was as if an external force was using him as a mouthpiece. "Why do you resist? Embrace what is to come. Embrace the power." Thompson, tears streaming down his face, lunged at Elijah, knocking him to the ground, hands seeking Elijah's throat. "Silence!" he roared, fingers digging into Elijah's flesh. The world swam as Elijah's vision blurred, Thompson's face a mask of rage and despair. But just as quickly as it started, it ended. Thompson was yanked off Elijah, his body thrown against the trench wall. TV, Miller, wielding a bayonet, stood between them, eyes blazing with anger and fear. "Enough!" Miller screamed, his voice hoarse. "Whatever this is, we need to fight it, not each other." Elijah coughed, massaging his bruised throat, gasping for air. As he did, the whispers faded into the background once more, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. The trenches, filled with the living, had never felt so haunted. Rain slashed through the sky, mingling with the mud and blood that saturated the trenches. The artillery barrage had been unyielding, the earth shaking with each explosive impact. Through the tumult, men cried, screamed, and fought desperately to survive. Elijah's world spun. The once defined boundaries of the trench had transformed into a grotesque kaleidoscope of twisted bodies, machinery, and muck. The sounds of battle, previously so distinct, gunshots, explosions, and anguished cries, merged into an indistinguishable cacophony. Amidst the chaos, the whispers returned, stronger and more commanding. "Surrender. Yield to me." His body felt like it was being pulled in multiple directions. An unseen force gripped him, and suddenly, time seemed to stretch, reality fragmenting before him. One moment he saw Miller, face contorted in pain. The next, he was in a sprawling labyrinth of machines, Legion's eye glaring at him from every corner. Elijah dropped his rifle, his hands flying to his head, fingers clawing at his helmet. "No, not real. It's not real," he screamed, but his voice was drowned in the chaos surrounding him. Suddenly, a searing pain in his left shoulder snapped him back to the present. He looked down to see a piece of shrapnel, hot and sharp, embedded deep within his flesh. Blood spurted out in rhythm with his pounding heart. A strong grip seized his good arm, dragging him away from the line of fire. Sergeant Thompson, face smeared with mud and blood, was pulling him to safety. "Stay with me, Elijah," he yelled over the deafening noise. But the world continued to blur for Elijah. Visions of monstrous machines overlapped with the horrors of the battlefield. He felt tremors seizing his body, rendering him helpless. His breaths came rapid and shallow, every inhale feeling like a lungful of smoke and ash. They reached a makeshift shelter, Thompson dropping him onto a cot. "Peavy," Miller was already there, dressing his own wounds. Seeing Elijah's state, he hurried over. "He's lost it, hasn't he whispered to Thompson. Thompson, wiping sweat and grime from his brow, nodded grimly. Elijah's voice came out as a weak moan. "It's all around. Everywhere. Can't escape. Can't fight." Miller, ever the optimist, despite the horrors they'd faced, knelt beside him, trying to penetrate the haze of pain and fear clouding Elijah's eyes. "Hey, remember who you are. You're Elijah, a fighter, not some puppet for Legion's games." Elijah blinked slowly, his focus shifting to Miller's face. The whispers receded slightly, their grip loosening. "Miller." Thompson squeezed Elijah's uninjured shoulder, a rare, gentle gesture from the hardened soldier. "We're here for you. Whatever this thing is, we face it together." As the night deepened and the battle raged on, in that dimly lit shelter, 3 soldiers clung to each other, their unity a beacon of hope amidst the enveloping darkness. The night hung like a shroud, heavy and still. Elijah lay on the cot, his body twitching sporadically, every muscle taut. The low hum of whispered conversations floated through the tent, but to him, it sounded like distant thunder. Eyes closed, his mind was a tempest. Blood-soaked fields emerged from the darkness, bodies strewn about like discarded dolls. A young soldier, face unrecognizable from the blast that took his life, reached out, mouth moving silently. TVT. Collins, perhaps, or another of the countless who'd met their end too soon. Suddenly, a monstrous machine, dripping in oil and gore, lumbered into the vision. Its metallic form seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting, every movement accompanied by the screech of metal. "You cannot escape," Legion's voice echoed, the dream landscape pulsating to its rhythm. Every drop of blood, every drop of re-scream, every death. It feeds me. Elijah's breathing grew ragged. He felt chains, cold and unyielding, wrapping around him. They dragged him deeper into the darkness, where distorted memories played out. Friends he'd watched die, moments of sheer terror, choices he regretted. Each flash was a stab of pain. Reality and dream bled into one. At one moment, he felt the weight of his rifle in his hands. The next, he was back in that infernal machine maze, pursued by an ever-present, malicious presence. "Elijah, wake up!" A voice penetrated the fog, hands shaking him roughly. His eyes snapped open, finding Peavy. Lewis hovering over him, face etched with concern. "You were screaming, thrashing. We couldn't wake you." Elijah's voice was a raw whisper. "It's all real, Lewis. Every nightmare, every vision, legion. Lewis glanced around, noting the concerned looks from their comrades. "Easy now," he whispered, leaning closer. "We've all seen things, heard things. But you're slipping, Elijah. More than the rest of us." A particularly gruesome image flashed in Elijah's mind. His hand shot up to grip Lewis's arm, fingers digging deep. They took them, Lewis, the machines. They took their souls, fed on them. Lewis's gaze never wavered, though pain flashed across his face from Elijah's grip. "Listen to me. This war, it does things to a man. Breaks him, but we have to hold on for each other." Elijah's voice was pleading, desperate. "It's not just the war. It's him. Legion. He wants something from me." Seeing Elijah's tortured state, Lewis's resolve hardened. "Then we'll face him together. But first, we need to get you help. Proper help." Tears glistened in Elijah's eyes, relief mingling with despair. Lewis pulled Elijah into a brief, fierce embrace. "I believe in you. And I promise, when this damn night ends, we'll find a way out of this darkness." As dawn approached, two soldiers sat side by side, united against unseen foes. Their bond a testament to the power of human connection amidst the horrors of war. The muddy ground squelched underfoot, a constant reminder of the grim reality of trench life. Elijah stood there, gazing at the network of ditches, barbed wire, and destroyed fortifications one last time. Around him, life continued. Private Moore approached slowly, pausing before he said, "Time to go, Elijah." There was a clear note of sadness in his voice. Elijah took a moment before responding, his voice distant. "I never thought it'd end like this. Not for me." Moore clasped his shoulder, eyes searching Elijah's. "This war." From the corner of his eye, Elijah caught the gaze of PVT. Lewis and a few others. They stood apart, their expressions a blend of understanding and sadness, members of that unspoken fraternity that had experienced legions haunting firsthand. A younger soldier spat into the mud, glaring at Elijah. "Madness is a coward's way out," he sneered, but a sharp nudge from his mate silenced him. Elijah's gaze was hollow as he whispered, "They don't understand. More, the real war. It's not out there." He pointed towards no man's land, but in here. He tapped his temple. Moore sighed. "Maybe it's better they don't. Ignorance is a luxury in times like these." The transport vehicle, a war-weary truck with peeling paint and creaky wheels, rumbled to life nearby. The driver leaned out. "Ready when you are." Elijah took one final look around, the memories of battles fought and friends lost flashing before him. The stench of blood, sweat, and decay clung to his nostrils. He could still hear the distant cries of the wounded and the ever-present hum of flies. Taking a deep breath, he whispered more to himself than anyone else. "Goodbye, old friend." The friend wasn't a person, but the front itself, a place of pain, loss, and ironically, where he'd felt most alive. As the transport began its journey, the horrific landscape of the front began to fade. In its place, the relatively untouched countryside began to emerge. But as the scenes of natural beauty rolled by, Elijah's heart was heavy, weighted by the knowledge of the supernatural war he was still embroiled in. Lewis's voice echoed in his mind, "We'll find a way out of this darkness." But as the miles increased between Elijah and the front, he couldn't help but wonder if the darkness was something he could ever truly leave behind. Elijah's eyes squinted against the glare as the transport approached a vast structure that stood isolated on a sprawling estate. The sanatorium, an architectural marvel of dark brick and Gothic spires, loomed against the overcast sky. Its massive windows, like countless unblinking eyes, stared out, reflecting the gloom of the world outside. A doctor approached as the transport halted, his crisp white coat standing out in sharp contrast to the dreary surroundings. "Welcome to St. Augustine Sanatorium," he announced, extending a hand. "I'm Dr. Matthews." Elijah nodded, still taking in the surroundings. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, but beneath it lingered a more sinister aroma, the faint odor of decay and despair. Inside, the polished wooden floors echoed with every step. Hushed whispers echoed through the corridors as they walked, with occasional sobs or manic laughter interrupting the silence. Elijah saw soldiers in various states. Some stared blankly into space. Others rocked back and forth in corners, while a few talked animatedly to themselves or unseen companions. In one room, a man with a bandaged head repeatedly screamed, "Get them off me! Get them off!" Another soldier with an empty sleeve sat eerily still, humming a childhood lullaby. Dr. Matthews gestured to an observation room where doctors clutching clipboards observed a soldier. "Shell shock," Matthews whispered, the term hanging in the air. "It's a reaction to the prolonged stress and horrors of the front. We're still learning, trying to understand it." "But it's more than just the battles, Doctor," Elijah interjected, his voice low and tense. "There's something else. Something unnatural." Dr. Matthews eyed him, considering. Elijah wanted to scream that it wasn't a mere trick of the mind, but he held back, already feeling the weight of skepticism. Later, in the dining hall, Elijah sat across from a man whose face was a map of scars. One eye stared unseeing, a milky white. "You're new," the man rasped, introducing himself as Corporal Sawyer. Elijah nodded, his appetite lost amidst the sounds of moans and the clattering of cutlery. Sawyer leaned in, voice low. "You've seen it too, haven't you? Not just the blood and mud, but the shadows, the whispers." Elijah met Sawyer's gaze, realizing he wasn't alone in his experiences. But just as he was about to respond, an anguished scream echoed through the hall. A soldier, face contorted in terror, shrieked, "He's here." The room went silent. Elijah's heart raced, every fiber of his being alert. He knew, deep down, that the battle was far from over. The war outside might have ceased, but the one inside was just beginning. Elijah's nights were restless, plagued by nightmares and the muffled cries of fellow soldiers reliving their own traumas. He often found solace wandering the cold, echoing hallways of the sanatorium, hoping the physical exertion might exhaust his tormented mind into sleep. One evening, while meandering near the sanatorium's west wing, a hushed conversation snaked its way into his ears. He paused, leaning against the cool stone to listen. "They say he was back on his feet in a week," whispered a raspy voice, unmistakably that of Corporal Sawyer. A younger voice, quivering with a mix of fear and hope, responded, "But Thompson, after he went in for that treatment, he disappeared. No one's seen him since." Sawyer's voice held a hint of defiance. "But Daniels, he came out better. Said they got rid of the nightmares, the tremors, all of it." The younger soldier, Daniels, sighed heavily. "Is it worth the risk? What if they're doing something to our minds, taking away more than just the memories?" Elijah's heart raced. He had heard whispers about experimental treatments, electroshocks, surgeries, even drugs imported from overseas. The desperation in the eyes of the haunted men around him made it believable that some might gamble on such uncertain odds. As he mulled over the conversation, he was suddenly seized from behind, a cloth drenched in some chemical pressed over his face. His world went dark. Awakening in a dimly lit room, strapped to a metallic table, Elijah's eyes darted in panic. The smell of iron and antiseptic was overpowering. Streaks of dried blood painted the floor, some leading to ominous-looking drains. The room echoed past horrors. Dr. Matthews, unrecognizable in surgical garb, loomed over him, his eyes cold, calculating. Beside him stood a machine, its purpose unclear but intimidating in design, with wires and sharp instruments protruding. "Ah, Elijah, you've awakened." "Good." Dr. Matthews's voice dripped with an unsettling calm. "You've been selected for a special treatment, a solution to end all your troubles." Elijah's voice trembled. "What are you doing to me?" "We're helping you," the doctor responded, adjusting dials on the machine, which hummed to life, emitting an eerie glow. "This will make you forget, make you whole again." The whir of a bone saw echoed, mingling with Elijah's screams. But as the room descended into violent chaos, somewhere deep in his psyche, the voice of Legion whispered, savoring the moment. Ah, the sweet symphony of despair. Hours, or perhaps days later, Elijah was found wandering the sanatorium's corridors, his gaze vacant, his mind a fortress of repressed memories. The experimental procedure had left its mark, but whether it was salvation or damnation remained to be seen. The sanatorium's daily routine had become monotonous for Elijah, a blur of therapy sessions and sedative, laced meals. But today was different. As the sun's dim rays filtered through the foggy window, a shadowy figure stepped into his room, the air becoming immediately charged. Dr. Alastair Crane was renowned, not just in the sanatorium, but throughout the country. Rumored to have close ties to the military, Crane was known for his groundbreaking work in mental manipulation and reprogramming. His methods, while effective, often teetered on the edge of ethics. "Good morning, Elijah," Dr. Crane greeted, a notebook in hand, his eyes glinting with intrigue. "I've been following your case quite closely." Elijah responded cautiously. "Why?" "Because," Dr. Crane began, flipping through his notebook, "your experience on the front, the trauma, the supernatural experiences with this Legion, they're unique, but they don't have to define you." Leaning closer, Dr. Crane continued, "I have a proposal, Elijah. A groundbreaking treatment reserved for special cases like yours. We've made incredible strides. Imagine waking up free from the clutches of your demons, both real and imagined." Elijah's eyes widened. "What does it involve?" Dr. Crane paused, choosing his words in layman's terms. "It's a mental reset. We delve into your brain, identifying and eliminating the traumatic imprints. It's still experimental, but has shown promise." Elijah's mind raced. A life free from the nightmares, the memories of friends being blown apart, and the insidious whispers of Legion sounded like a dream. And the side effects, Elijah probed. Memories of the ominous rumors about missing soldiers flashing through his mind. Dr. Crane sighed. "There have been complications in some cases. Disorientation, memory gaps, personality shifts. But many have emerged." As Dr. Crane spoke, Elijah couldn't help but notice the bloodstains on the doctor's shoes. Faint but noticeable, the pristine image of the doctor was marred by this one imperfection. The room fell silent, the tick of the clock on the wall echoing loudly. Elijah felt the weight of the decision bearing down on him, the promise of peace battling the potential price to pay. Legion's voice, fainter now but ever present, whispered menacingly in his ear. "Can you truly escape me? Or will you just become another of his failed experiments?" Elijah gulped, his resolve shaking. "I need time to think." Dr. Crane nodded. "Of course. The door to peace is open, Elijah. It's up to you to walk through it." As he left, the room seemed colder, the shadows deeper. The promise of peace dangled tantalizingly in front of Elijah, a beacon in his tortured existence. But at what cost? Elijah's footsteps echoed eerily as he was led down a dim corridor, its walls lined with heavy steel doors. Each had a small window at eye level, and occasionally he caught fleeting glimpses of tormented souls within, restrained and surrounded by a maze of wires and tubes. "Where are you taking me?" Elijah rasped, trying to mask his growing dread. The escort, a tall man in a white coat, answered without turning. "The observation wing." They arrived at a large wooden door. Above it, a plaque read, "The future of mental restoration." Elijah felt a chill. The door groaned open to reveal a vast room that seemed both like a hospital ward and a scientist's experiment gone awry. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and chemicals. Whirring machines punctuated the room's stillness. Their vibrations felt deep within one's chest. Doctors and scientists, faces obscured by masks and goggles, whispered amongst themselves. Some scribbled frantically on clipboards, while others adjusted dials on machines that hummed and sparked. One particular machine caught Elijah's attention. It was larger than the others, fitted with restraints and a helmet, like contraption connected to myriad wires. The sight of it rekindled memories of his dreams, where man was no longer the master of machine, but its slave. A scientist noticed his gaze. "Impressive, isn't it?" she remarked. "Cutting-edge technology. You're looking at the pinnacle of our work here." "What does it do?" Elijah asked, his voice quivering. The scientist smiled coldly. "It frees you, Mr. Elijah. From pain, from memories, from entities like Legion." A nearby door opened and two orderlies dragged out a soldier. His uniform was drenched in blood, his eyes vacant. The two left a trail of bloody footprints as they passed. Elijah's heart raced. What happened to him? The scientist sighed. A minor setback. His mind was weaker than anticipated. Elijah felt the walls closing in, the weight of the machinery and the sterile scent of antiseptic overpowering. Memories flooded back. The trenches, the gas attacks, the bodies of his fallen comrades. One doctor approached, his face mask smeared with something red. "You're next, Elijah." He thought of the machine, its cold metallic restraints, and shuddered. Yet the whispers of Legion and the torment of his memories beckoned him towards the promise of relief. As he hesitated, the room's shadows seemed to lengthen, and the chilling whispers of Legion grew louder, drowning out the hum of the machines. "You can't escape, Elijah. Whether by their hand or mine, you will be claimed." Elijah's resolve wavered, trapped between the gruesome reality of the sanatorium's experiments and the relentless grip of Legion. The room was cold. Elijah's heartbeat was the only sound as he lay down on the narrow bed, every fiber of his being tense. Night had always been a time of torment, but tonight, the weight of his impending decision bore down on him like a mountain. With a heavy sigh, he drifted into sleep. Suddenly, he was no longer in the sanatorium. The ground was hard, covered in jagged rocks. Thunderclouds, dark and ominous, roiled overhead, casting jagged lightning bolts that lit up the twisted landscape. Each bolt revealed glimpses of scenes from Elijah's past, faces of fallen comrades, moments of sheer terror, memories he wanted to bury. From the midst of the storm, Legion emerged, towering over him. But this was different. Instead of the usual malevolence, there was an intensity in those endless eyes, a raw power that went beyond mere dominance. "Human," Legion's voice boomed, echoing off the rocks and drowning the thunder. "You tread on dangerous ground. They promise release. But at what cost?" Elijah, summoning all his courage, shouted back, "Isn't that what you want? To see me broken? Vulnerable?" Legion leaned closer, its vastness blocking out the sky. "You misunderstand, Elijah. You're already vulnerable to me, but this experiment, it will tear the fabric of your being. It will make you hollow, an empty vessel, and what fills an empty vessel, It's far easier to invade a ruin than a fortress. Gore-filled images flashed before Elijah's eyes. Patients who underwent the treatment. Their skulls opened, brains exposed. A horror of blood and bone. Scientists with crazed looks, delighting in the grotesque mutilation. Their hands stained in an unending crimson. Their laughs echoed hauntingly, blending with the screams of agony from their subjects. You're trying to scare me, Elijah gasped, tears mixing with sweat. Legion's form shifted, appearing almost human, though its eyes retained their bottomless depth. Isn't it ironic? The demon warning the man about men. You think they want to help, but their ambition blinds them to the horrors they unleash. And once you're altered, you'll be even more attuned to our realm, to entities far worse than I. With a sinking feeling, Elijah realized there was a tone he had never heard before in Legion's voice. Concern. Why? Why are you telling me this? The entity's form blurred, shifting between monstrous and human. Because, Elijah, our bond is unique. I am a part of you, just as you are a part of me. I revel in our struggle. If they break you, our connection weakens. But more than that, some lines should never be crossed. Suddenly, the ground cracked open, swallowing Elijah, plunging him into darkness. The last thing he heard was Legion's fading voice. Choose wisely. Human. Elijah awoke, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. The dream was intense, the warning clear, but what shook him most was the realization that Legion, the entity he had feared and fought, might now be the very thing trying to save him from a fate worse than death. Elijah's days were now marked by a constant haze. As he wandered the corridors of the sanatorium, the cold tiles under his feet seemed to mock him with their rigidity. They had a set path, but he was lost, torn between the seductive allure of the treatment and the sinister warning of Legion. Each step brought memories of the war crashing back. The mud, the blood, the shrieks of pain and anguish. He recalled Michael, his best friend, whose eyes held the same haunted look that Elijah now saw in his own reflection. The memory of that artillery blast, Michael's screams muffled by the deafening roar, his body torn apart in front of Elijah, added a weight to Elijah's chest that made it hard to breathe. A sharp pain stabbed through his mind as he remembered the countless nights haunted by Legion, the demonic entity that seemed to be both his tormentor and, ironically, his protector. The cacophony of past traumas left him feeling cornered, trapped between two equally harrowing fates. A gentle hand on his shoulder broke him from his reverie. He turned to see Jonathan, a fellow patient whose sunken eyes and gaunt face reflected the toll the war had taken. "You seem distant," Jonathan began, his voice rough from disuse. "It's the treatment, isn't it?" Elijah nodded, swallowing hard. "I've been offered a chance. But after what I've seen, what I've been told—" "I know," Jonathan interrupted, his gaze sharp. "There are tales, stories of those who've undergone it. Some say they've been reborn, free from the horrors of the past. Others—" Voice trailed off, but the implication hung heavy between them. The two walked to a quiet corner where a dim bulb flickered overhead. Jonathan cleared his throat. "There's something you should know. I've seen one of those sessions. I was curious and horrified." Elijah's eyes widened. Jonathan's face contorted as if recalling a painful memory. They strapped the man down, electrodes attached to his head. At first it seemed normal, just small jolts. But then they cranked it up. The man's body convulsed violently, blood streaming from his eyes, nose, even his ears. His screams. They haunt me. They said it was a necessary step in the procedure. Elijah felt bile rise in his throat. The weight of his decision felt even more burdensome now. Why would anyone go through that? Jonathan looked away, his voice breaking. For the same reason we fought in the war. Hope. The hope that maybe, just maybe, we'd find peace. Be free from the nightmares. Elijah's hand clenched into a fist. The weight of the decision bore down on him. But with Jonathan's words, a clarity began to form. The road ahead was uncertain, but he had faced uncertainty before. He took a deep breath. Thank you, Jonathan. You've given me something to ponder. No matter what I choose, I refuse to be a pawn in their twisted game. The two men shared a moment of understanding. The bond between them forged by shared pain and the looming shadows of choices yet to be made. The door to the treatment room loomed ahead. It felt heavier than any Elijah had ever encountered, symbolic of the threshold he was about to cross. He took a deep breath, letting the cold, sterile air fill his lungs. With a grim determination, he pushed open the door, entering what felt like the mouth of hell. Inside, the room was bathed in a harsh white light. The center was dominated by a chair that seemed more like a torture device than medical equipment. Straps dangled ominously from its arms and legs, and a tangle of wires led to a machine that blinked and hummed ominously. Doctors in white coats, their faces obscured by masks, bustled around. "Ah, you've arrived," one of them said, jotting down notes on a clipboard. "Please, take a seat." Elijah hesitated for a moment. Then, with a resolve born from desperation, he sat. Almost immediately, hands were on him, fastening the straps around his wrists and ankles. Another doctor approached, placing cold, metallic discs attached to wires on his forehead. The chill of the metal felt like ice on his already fevered skin. "Remember," the leading doctor began, his voice cold and clinical, "this is for your own good. Just relax and let the procedure do its work." A hum emanated from the machine as it powered up. Elijah's heart raced. He tried to focus, but a sudden jolt sent waves of pain coursing through him. It felt as if his very soul was being torn from his body. His mind became a chaotic whirlpool, memories assaulting him from all directions. He saw the trenches, the mud, the faces of friends lost to the war's merciless embrace. He felt the sting of bullets, the choking grip of gas, and the numbing cold of nights without end. Each memory was more vivid than the last. The pain, the sorrow, all magnified 100-fold. And then, in the midst of the storm, Legion appeared. The entity's presence was overpowering, its form shifting and changing, mirroring the chaos inside Elijah's mind. Its voice, usually a whisper, now roared. "Fool, you've invited them in. They'll strip away all that you are." Yet, amid the cacophony, another voice whispered, gentler, more familiar. "Hold on, Elijah. Hold on." Was it his own inner strength, or another entity trying to reach him? The machine's hum grew louder, drowning everything else. Sparks flew, a burning scent filled the air, and pain overwhelmed Elijah's senses. It felt as if his mind was being stretched, pulled apart, atom by atom. His vision darkened, the world around him fading. The voices, the memories, the agony all blurred into one. And as the tumultuous storm within him raged on, Elijah's consciousness slipped away, plunging him into an abyss of silence. The room was left in stillness, the machine's hum the only sound. The doctors exchanged glances, uncertainty clouding their eyes. The procedure was complete, but its outcome remained a haunting enigma. Elijah's eyes fluttered open, the gentle rays of sunlight piercing through the sterile white curtains. The room was a stark contrast to the clinical chamber where he had endured the harrowing procedure. Soft sheets cradled him, and the air smelled fresh, devoid of the metallic tang of machinery. The silence was a soothing balm to his frayed nerves. For a few moments, Elijah lay there, gathering his thoughts. Gone were the crippling tremors that once plagued him, the piercing memories of war and the haunting presence of Legion. It felt as if a weight had been lifted. A dark cloud dispersed. A doctor, clipboard in hand, entered the room. "Ah, you're awake," he remarked, jotting down a note. "How are you feeling, Elijah?" "Different," Elijah murmured, struggling to find the words. "Lighter, somehow." The doctor smiled, a hint of triumph in his eyes. "The procedure was a success. You're free now, free from the chains that once bound you." But as the days went by, it became evident that while the chains of the past had been broken, new ones had taken their place. Elijah's demeanor had certainly improved, but at a cost. The world seemed duller, colors less vibrant, and emotions, once sharp and raw, now felt muted. Fellow patients took notice of his transformation. Whispers filled the hallways, some out of admiration, others from trepidation. Many approached him, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and hope. One evening, a familiar face, James, a soldier who had been in the trenches alongside him, approached. "Elijah," he began, his voice quivering with emotion. "It's really you, isn't it? You've changed." Elijah stared back, searching for memories of their shared experiences, but found only shadows. "I remember. We fought together," he said slowly. James swallowed hard, tears forming in his eyes. "They took part of you away, didn't they? The part that remembered the horrors, the pain. But what else did they take, Elijah?" Elijah struggled with the question. The procedure had removed the trauma, but had it also taken away the essence of who he was? The emotions, the bonds, the shared struggles? "You're different," James continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "You might not remember the gore, the violence, or even Legion, but at what cost?" The room fell silent, the weight of James's words hanging heavy. Elijah, once the symbol of strength and resilience, was now a puzzle. Pieces missing, a man rebuilt but not whole. The promise of peace had come at a tremendous price, one that Elijah was only beginning to comprehend. The sanatorium had its schedule, and Elijah tried to adhere to it. Breakfast at 7, therapeutic sessions at 10, and a brief recess in the gardens at noon. The routines were supposed to help him reintegrate, to relearn the motions of daily life. But with each passing day, the veneer of normalcy showed cracks. One morning, as Elijah stood before the ornate mirror in his room, brushing his hair, a flicker caught his attention. The reflection wasn't his. A distorted silhouette, twisted and grotesque, glared back. Heart racing, he blinked, and just as suddenly, his own image resumed. The moment was fleeting, but unmistakable. "Just a trick of the light," he muttered to himself, but uncertainty gnawed at him. The gardens, once a place of solace, now held their own mysteries. As he strolled along the manicured pathways, cold drafts would sweep by, seemingly from nowhere, making the hairs on his neck stand on end. One afternoon, as he paused to admire a rose bush, he noticed its shadow on the ground. Instead of delicate petals and thorns, the shadow formed an ominous, writhing shape, eerily reminiscent of Legion's form. The black tendrils seemed to reach out for him. He stepped back, heart pounding, only to see the shadow revert to its ordinary rosebush form. And then there were the whispers. At night, when the sanatorium plunged into a hushed silence, soft murmurs reached his ears. They were neither menacing nor comforting, just a constant, barely audible undercurrent that kept him on edge. Elijah tried to dismiss these oddities, attributing them to residual effects of the treatment. But one evening, as he sat in the common room reading, another patient, Clara, approached him. Her face was pale, eyes wide with a mix of fear and recognition. "You hear them too, don't you?" she whispered, voice quivering. Elijah looked up, taken aback. "Hear what?" "The whispers," Clara responded, leaning closer. "At night. They're not just in our heads, Elijah. They're real." He shuddered. The realization that he wasn't alone in experiencing these disturbances was both comforting and terrifying. The procedure had muted the traumas. But had it also amplified their connection with Legion? Days turned into weeks, and the shadows grew bolder. One night, after the soft murmurs became a cacophony of voices, Elijah found himself drawn to his room's window. The moon cast an ethereal glow, and on the walls of the sanatorium, shadows danced. But these weren't the benign silhouettes of trees or structures. They were grotesque, twisted, and eerily human, a grim tableau of suffering and despair. A cold dread settled in Elijah's heart. The procedure might have sealed away the overt symptoms of his trauma, but the door to Legion, it seemed, was still ajar. The entity was here, watching, waiting, and lurking just beyond the edges of perception. Rain drizzled down, washing over the dark, polished stone of the memorial. As Elijah approached, the weight of the war pressed heavily on his shoulders, each step heavier than the last. Upon the stone were carved names. Names of friends, names of friends, names of enemies, names of the brave men who'd never returned home. He ran his fingers over the cold surface, feeling each name, each groove, as though hoping to connect with the souls behind them. Among them, he found a familiar one, James Freeman. "Great grandfather," he murmured, remembering the tales of his family's struggles, how James had been a pillar of strength during his own tumultuous times. It struck Elijah how the cycle of violence and despair had repeated itself in his lineage. A sudden voice broke his reverie. "Takes you back, doesn't it?" Elijah turned to see an old comrade, Captain Marcus, his face lined with years of service and the scars of many battles. Marcus continued, a faraway look in his eyes. "You know, my grandfather used to tell me about the world wars. He'd talk about the price they paid, the sacrifices they made for what they believed was progress." Elijah nodded, and yet here we are, still paying the same price, despite all the advancements and changes. Marcus pointed to the horizon, where the ruins of an old factory stood, a relic from an age of industrialization. "You see that? That's where my grandfather worked after the war. Thought it was a symbol of a brighter future. Now, it's just a testament to the past." The two veterans sat, lost in thought, reflecting on the cost of progress. The world around them had evolved, but the challenges and moral dilemmas remained. The technology of warfare had changed, but the price in blood and tears remained consistent. Elijah clenched his fist, blood oozing out as his nails dug into his palm, a grim reminder of the inner and outer battles he'd fought. "Sometimes, I wonder if we ever truly progress or if we just find new ways to inflict pain." Marcus nodded, looking at Elijah's bleeding hand with understanding. "Our ancestors, they hoped for a better world for us. We owe it to them, and to the next generation, to keep fighting. Not just wars, but for true progress. So that one day these names carved in stone will serve as a reminder, not of endless conflict, but of the sacrifices made to bring an end to it." As the rain continued to fall, washing away the blood from Elijah's hand, the two men stood together, a united front, bound by shared memories and a hope for a better future.